for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 18, The Ancient and Accepted Rite, from the Freemason's Manual, or Illustrations of Masonry by Jeremiah Howe. Chapter 18, The Ancient and Accepted Rite. All under various names adore and love one power immense, which ever rules above. Dryden. Let envy howl while heaven's whole chorus sings, and bark at honor not conferred by kings. Pope. This rite is by some authorities designated as the Scotch Rite, as having derived its first establishment from Scottish Masons. The earliest record we have of the practice of any of the degrees contained in the rite is that the lodge St. Georges de la Observance, number 49, chartered by the Grand Lodge of England in 1736, stationed in Covent Garden, worked the sublime degrees in a body attached to their lodge. The members were mostly of French or Italian extraction, and the authority to work these degrees, it is said, was derived from Scotland. But there is positive living testimony that some of the degrees in the rite, as the 18th, 28th and 30th, were practiced in the Midland counties in the latter half of the last century by brethren who were descendants of the ancient York Masons. And at Nottingham in particular, they were worked under the authority of Lord Radcliffe, who was Grand Master of the Templars. Brother Preston says, January 4th, 1787, was opened in London the Grand Chapter of Harodim. Though of ancient date and practiced in different parts of Europe, there is no record prior to this of its establishment in England. The mysteries of this order are peculiar to the institution itself, while the lectures include every branch of the Masonic system and represent the art of Masonry in a finished and complete form. The presiding officer was called the Chief Harrod. As far as can now be ascertained, the chapter of Harodim appears to have been a combination of the system of the ancient York Masons with other degrees imported from France, as got up by Ramsay and others. Harodim is a Hebrew word signifying princes or rulers. There were 300 chief overseers whom Solomon appointed to set the people at work, as mentioned in the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 2, verse 18. After Preston's time, we hear nothing of the Harodim chapter. Some of the degrees now embodied in the ancient and accepted rite continued to be practiced up to a very recent period, and little over 30 years since were conferred on brethren now living at the Crown Tavern on Clerkenwell Green, Brother Goldsworthy being one of the acting directors of the proceedings. We have been told that this association was a council of the 9 excellent masters, and thus might be analogous to the Supreme Council, but we are unable to learn what degrees were conferred. For excepting as to the Ark Mariner or Noachite and the Rose Croix, the survivors have no knowledge. They gave no certificate. The Old Kent Lodge, now number 15, had a warrant from the late Duke of Kent, empowering it to confer 7 degrees, among which was the Knight of the Sun. A price for each degree was named in the warrant. The warrant was one of confirmation for one of ancient date that had been lost. It is said that this warrant is now in the possession of a brother who was a member at the time, and we believe now living. The Lodge of Fidelity, now number 3, was the last lodge that worked the old degrees. It met at the place named. When the Duke of Sussex came into power, he exerted all his influence to suppress the practices we have referred to, and the degrees referred to were confined to a few brethren, survivors of the ancient York Masons, of whom the present MP Sovereign of the Order, Dr. Leeson, was one. At the death of the Duke of Sussex, it was thought desirable to assemble the scattered fragments of the ancient degrees, and by general consent of the remaining members of the ancient order, to form a general governing body of the ancient and accepted rite. The present degrees of the Knight Templar and the Holy Arch not being found to exist amongst the ancient degrees of the order as elsewhere described, it seemed impossible to combine them in the rite, and thus it was thought better to establish an independent conclave for the degree of Knight Templar by a general accordance of the various existing encampments, a great majority of which acceded thereto, and those with one exception have since joined. It was then that an interview took place between the leaders, and it having been satisfactorily proved that none of the existing encampments ever had any authority by warrant from any legally constituted authority to give the degrees of Rose Croix and Kadosh, they being degrees of the ancient and accepted rite. It was agreed to discontinue any assumption of authority over those degrees on the part of the Grand Conclave, whilst the Supreme Council, on their part, discontinued any authority or interference with the Templar degree. Among the leaders of this movement, the present sovereign Grand Commander of the Supreme Council was the most active, and in concert with a few others, commenced the necessary steps for the formation of a Council of the Ancient and Accepted Rite. Whilst these were progressing, Brother Crucifix obtained a legal authority from the Supreme Council at New York, now at Boston, giving him the first rank. Brother Leeson, as a descendant of the ancient York Masons, was at the time in correspondence with another body for a like authority. But on the arrival of the New York power, overtures were made to him to forego his ancient privileges and to assist in the establishment of a Supreme Council in this country under the authority of the American body. The first members of the council were 1. Dr. Thomas Crucifix, 2. Dr. Henry Beaumont Leeson, 3. Henry Udall, 4. Richard Lee Wilson, 5. Reverend Dr. George Oliver, 6. David W. Nash, 7. Thomas Pryor, 8. William Tucker, 9. Sir John Robinson, Baronet. Brothers Udall and Nash have been removed from the council. Brothers Oliver and Robinson have resigned. Brothers Crucifix, Wilson, Pryor and Tucker are deceased. The present MP sovereign alone survives of the original council. The warrant of the New York Council was issued October 26, 1845, and the council was organized in March 1846. Brother Leeson went over to Paris to visit the governing bodies of the order, by whom he was received with open arms. A warrant of recognition was at once granted to the English Council, and Brother Leeson was appointed the representative of the Grand Orient in this country. The Supreme Council of Ireland granted a like acknowledgement. It cannot but be acknowledged that by the establishment of the Supreme Council, the English Masons who had taken the degrees included in the rite are now in a more satisfactory position, inasmuch as they are in accordance with the Supreme Councils of Ireland, Scotland, France, Germany, and the Brazils. The degrees in this rite are not innovations on pure symbolic Masonry, but are rather illustrations, and as such are full of much instructive speculation, combining many traditions of great interest to Masons, shedding great light on the object of the institution. They were also cultivated on the continent of Europe in a similar way to that adopted in Great Britain, until their embodiment by Frederick the Great, King of Prussia. It appears that in 1740, soon after his ascension to the throne, Frederick chartered a lodge at Berlin by the name of the Three Globes and organized it as a Grand Lodge. The degrees of craft masonry were governed by this Grand Lodge, and the higher degrees of the rite of Haradim or perfection with its 25 degrees were under the government of an inner East, whose members were elected by the Grand Lodge. This rite of perfection or Haradim comprised 11 degrees, viz. Knight of the Sword or East, Prince of Jerusalem, Knight of the East and West, Sovereign Prince Rose Croix, and 7 of the superior degrees belonging to the consistories of sublime princes of the royal secret, including that last named. Some few years after, the degrees were increased in number to 32 by making 3 grades of the 32nd and adding Noachite or Prussian Knight, Knight of St. Andrew, and some preparatory degrees to the series. These degrees, or rite, although extensively practiced on the continent of America, had no governing head until Frederick the Great condescended to become and was acknowledged and proclaimed chief with the rank as declared by the constitutions of the order, ratified at Berlin on the 25th of October 1762, of Sovereign Grand Inspector General and Grand Commander. These constitutions were proclaimed for the government of sublime and perfect Masons, chapters, councils, colleges and consistories of the royal and military art of Freemasonry over the surface of the 2 hemispheres. From this body emanated authority to confer these degrees in France and America, and it is by one of these warrants issued for New York the Supreme Council now act. On the 1st of May, 1786, the Grand Constitution of the 33rd degree, called the Supreme Council of Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, was finally ratified by His Majesty the King of Prussia, who, as Grand Commander of the Order of Princes of the Royal Secret, possessed the sovereign Masonic power over the craft. By the new constitution, this high power was conferred on a supreme council composed of 9 brethren in each nation who possessed all the Masonic prerogatives in their own district that His Majesty individually possessed, and are sovereigns in Masonry. The Supreme Council in the South United States declared, although many of the sublime degrees are a constitution of the blue degrees, yet there is no interference between the two bodies. The sublime Masons never initiate into the blue degrees without a legal warrant for that purpose from a symbolic Grand Lodge, but they communicate the secrets of the chair to such applicants as have not already received them previous to their admittance into the Sublime Lodge. Yet they are at the same time informed that it does not give them rank as past masters in the Grand Lodge. The designation as used by the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree for England and Wales and the dependencies of the British Crown differs as regards 6 of those of Prussia, but in practice we believe them to be the same or but slightly altered. The degrees are stated as 33 in number, the first 3 being the symbolic, viz. The entered apprentice, fellow craft and master mason. The Mason who is possessed of the certificate of these last named is, according to the present usage, admissible to all degrees included below the 18th degree, which is the Sovereign Prince Rose-Croix of Herodom. This must undoubtedly appear to the brother who has been exalted to the Royal Arch, and who has gone through the long course required to reach the chair of a craft lodge, to be a wholesale mode of conferring rank. We conceive that, according to strict rule, none but a regularly installed master of a craft lodge is eligible to these degrees. In fact, the certificate of the council begins by certifying and acknowledging the brother to be an expert master and past master of the symbolic lodges. In other countries, we understand the Supreme Council claim the right to confer the rank of past master, but in England no attempt is made to interfere with the functions of the Grand Lodge or to infringe its constitutions. The formation of a Supreme Council of Sovereign Grand Inspectors General of the 33rd degree is in this manner. The inspector to whom the degree is first given regularly is thereby authorized and empowered to confer it on another brother who is duly qualified by character and degrees to receive from him his obligation. These 2 give it in like manner to a third, when the 3 admit the rest by voting viva voce, beginning with the youngest inspector. One nay excludes an applicant forever, if the reasons given for such negative are deemed sufficient. After the first 3, the rules of reception must be regularly adhered to. The first 2 admitted to the 33 degrees should be the presiding officers of the council. In case of death, resignation, or absence from the country not to return, of the first officer, the MP Sovereign Grand Commander, the second officer or Lieutenant Grand Commander takes his place and appoints an Inspector General to succeed to his own office. In case of the like occurrences to the second officer, the MP Grand Commander appoints another Inspector General to succeed him, who thus retires. The MP Sovereign Grand Commander in like manner appoints the Treasurer General, the Grand Master of Ceremonies, the Secretary General, the Captain of the Lifeguards, and fills up all the vacancies as they may occur. Every Inspector General previous to his election must pay into the Treasury the sum of 10 guineas. The like sum has to be paid for the 32 degrees, 31 degrees, and 30 degrees. There must at all times for any business in either of these degrees be present 3 of the Supreme Council, of which one must be either of the 2 first officers. The authority of the ancient York Masons was transmitted viva voce from individual to individual, the oldest surviving Mason being considered for the time being as the chief Herod of the order, whose duty it was to seek out some worthy brother to whom he could entrust the keys of the cipher and other documents necessary for the preservation of the order. And it was the duty of that individual to conceal from the world generally the knowledge that he had been so entrusted, but it was known or generally understood by the members of the order. The regulations of the Supreme Grand Council for England and Wales and dependencies of the British Crown are as follows. Brethren desirous of cultivating the ineffable degrees of the ancient and accepted rite, from the 4th to the 18th inclusive, in any city, town or place where the same have not yet been established, under the authority of the Supreme Grand Council 33 degrees for England and Wales and the dependencies of the British Crown, must apply for a warrant to establish the same by petition to the said Supreme Grand Council, addressed to the illustrious Grand Secretary General for the time being. Such petition to be signed by at least 6 princes Rose-Croix, or members of the higher degrees holding allegiance to the Supreme Grand Council 33 degrees, 3 of whom must be residents in the immediate vicinity of the place for which the warrant is required, such city, town or place not being within the distance of 10 miles from any other chapter already legally established. A warrant for a sovereign chapter Rose-Croix will include authority to hold a Grand Lodge of Perfection and a Council of Princes of Jerusalem. The Grand Lodge of Perfection will govern the degrees from the 4th to the 14th inclusive, the Council of Princes of Jerusalem, the 15th and 16th degrees, and the 17th and the 18th degrees will be placed under the immediate administration of the Rose-Croix chapter. A warrant cannot be removed from the city, town, or place for which it was originally granted, without the permission of the Supreme Grand Council first had and obtained, and the charge for such removal shall be 2 guineas. Form of petition for a warrant. We, the undersigned members of the ancient and accepted Rite, under the Supreme Grand Council 33 degrees for England and Wales and the dependencies of the British Crown, anxious to promote the welfare and extend the good of the order, do hereby petition the Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, 33 degrees in council assembled, to grant a warrant to open and hold a Lodge of Perfection, a Council of Princes of Jerusalem, and a Sovereign Chapter Rose-Croix of Herodom, to be named the. And we do further recommend our brother to be nominated the first most wise sovereign of the same, our brother to be the most equitable sovereign prince master of the Council of Princes of Jerusalem, and our brother to be the thrice potent master of the Lodge of Perfection. Signed, dated. The fee for such warrant to be 5 guineas. Under necessary restrictions, authorized rituals may be obtained on payment of the expenses of preparing the same, which may be ascertained by application to the illustrious Grand Treasurer General for the time being. Whenever a warrant is granted by the Supreme Grand Council 33 degrees to hold any Lodge of Perfection, Council of Princes of Jerusalem or Sovereign Chapter Rose-Croix, application must be made to a Sovereign Grand Inspector General 33 degrees to consecrate the same in ancient and solemn form. Copies of such bylaws as may be agreed on by any Lodge of Perfection, Council of Princes of Jerusalem or Sovereign Chapter Rose-Croix shall be sent to the illustrious Grand Secretary General for the time being, one to be retained by him, and the other to be deposited in the archives of the Order. And notice shall also be given to the illustrious Grand Secretary General for the time being whenever any alteration of such bylaws occurs. Note: by the ancient constitutions of the Order, no bylaws have any force or power unless sanctioned and approved by the Supreme Grand Council. No member of the 17th degree shall be advanced to the rank of a Sovereign Prince Rose-Croix, HRDM, for a less sum than 3 guineas. Costume of the 18th degree. The brethren must be clothed in black, over which they should wear a dalmatic of white cloth or stuff, bordered in black with a Latin cross in red on the front and back. Apron of white satin bordered with red and lined with black silk. On the satin is painted or embroidered the jewel of the order, the pelican. On the lining, a red cross. Collar: a waved or watered red ribbon 4 inches wide with narrow gold edging lined with black. On the black side, 3 red crosses, 1 on each side and 1 at the point above a black rosette from which the jewel is to be suspended. Jewel: compasses surmounted with an antique crown, points extended to 60 degrees, a cross within the compasses. On one side of the jewel, a pelican feeding its young. On the other, a white eagle with wings extended as rising in the air. On both sides, on the joint of the compasses, a red rose. In the first point, the jewel should be covered with black crepe. No Lodge of Perfection, Council of Princes of Jerusalem or Sovereign Chapter Rose-Croix within the jurisdiction of the Supreme Council can correspond, form any alliance or hold any intercourse with any other Lodge of Perfection, Council of Princes of Jerusalem or Sovereign Chapter Rose-Croix, nor with any Masonic body whatever, under any denomination whatever, whether foreign or domestic, which professes to cultivate any of the degrees of the ancient and accepted Rite, or any other Rite, or any sublime or symbolic degrees whatever, unless such lodge, council or chapter or other Masonic body has been recognized as lawful and regular by the Supreme Grand Council. In all cases of expulsion, a vote of 2/3 of the members present shall be required, and such vote shall be submitted to the Supreme Grand Council 33 degrees for confirmation. Any brother having received the 3 first degrees of craft masonry in a duly warranted lodge on the production of his Master Mason certificate and on satisfactory assurance of his upright Masonic and moral character is eligible for advancement to the degrees of the ancient and accepted rite. But the most wise sovereigns of Rose-Croix chapters are earnestly cautioned to be very particular as to the social and Masonic character of those they admit to the privileges of this exalted degree. No Lodge of Perfection, Council of Princes of Jerusalem, Sovereign Chapter Rose-Croix, or other meeting held under the authority of the Supreme Grand Council can recognize the works of or hold Masonic communication with or receive as visitors any brethren who have not taken the oath of allegiance to the Supreme Grand Council 33 degrees, excepting brethren holding under foreign Supreme Councils duly recognized, unless such brethren shall take and sign such OB and be duly affiliated and regularized by special dispensations from the Supreme Grand Council, such dispensations bearing the signature of the most puissant sovereign Grand Commander for the time being. Applications for such dispensations must be made at least 14 days previous to the day of meeting, and must be forwarded by the most wise sovereign of the Rose-Croix chapter, accompanied by the fee of 1 guinea, to the illustrious Grand Treasurer General for the time being, and a copy of the Oath of Allegiance, duly signed and certified by such most wise sovereign, must accompany the application. Every Lodge of Perfection, Council of Princes of Jerusalem, or Sovereign, Chapter Rose-Croix shall, once in each year, in the month of November, fill up the printed form which will be sent and return the same to the illustrious Grand Secretary General for the time being, with the names, offices and descriptions of subscribing and honorary members, and be particular to notify any death, resignation or removal which may have occurred since the last return. These returns are to be accompanied by the fee of 1 shilling for each subscribing member for verifying the register. The names and addresses of those who are advanced admitted as joining members from other chapters or affiliated must be sent without delay to the illustrious Grand Treasurer General for the time being, with the fee of 10 shillings each for registering and certificate. Unless this rule has been complied with, no brother can be received at any subsequent meeting of the ancient and accepted rite. If no returns are made for the space of 3 years, the warrant of such chapter shall be ipso facto forfeited, unless on application duly made to the Supreme Grand Council 33 degrees, such forfeiture be rescinded. All Lodges of Perfection, Councils of Princes of Jerusalem and Sovereign Chapters Rose-Croix shall take precedence according to the dates of their respective warrants. By the ancient constitutions of the Order, no chapter of Grand Elected Knights K.H. can be held except under the immediate authority of the Supreme Grand Council, 3 of whose members must be present. Such chapters are held on the 2nd Tuesdays in April and October at their Grand East London, when candidates may be received. Recommendations for such must be sent from the most wise sovereigns of the Rose-Croix chapters, of which such candidates are members, stating their names, residences, professions, etc., etc., to the illustrious Grand Secretary General for the time being, on or before the 2nd Tuesday in the months of March and September, in order that they may be submitted by him to the Supreme Grand Council 33 degrees. And if favorably received, notice will be sent to such candidates with letters of admission to be by them presented on the day appointed for the meeting. The brethren of the 30th degree must be clothed in black, with white gloves. They should wear a white mantle bordered with black. Sash, to be a broad black ribbon bordered with white, worn from the left shoulder to the right hip. Upon it, opposite the breast, a red Teutonic cross with the letters K.H. in the center, placed on 2 swords crossed as a cross of St. Andrew, sword belt of black leather or velvet, jewel, a black double-headed spread eagle holding a sword in its claws, to be worn suspended round the neck from a flame-colored ribbon. All party spirit and cabal in any council or lodge is expressly forbidden under pain of expulsion. Soliciting votes at an election is strictly forbidden, and the brother doing it is liable to expulsion. If a prince give another prince a challenge, he shall be excluded forever. Princes are strictly to observe the rule enforcing justice and good order, and their conduct in life should be irreproachable. If any member of a council or lodge in this jurisdiction be guilty of any immoral or un-Masonic conduct, or in any particular disobeys the statutes and regulations, constitutions and laws of our illustrious order, he shall be reprimanded, suspended, or expelled according to the aggravation of the offense. All sublime Masons who have received any degrees in a regular lodge of perfection or council of princes of Jerusalem in this jurisdiction, although for the time being they may not be members of any such lodge or council, shall be amenable for their conduct as sublime Freemasons to the council or lodge nearest their places of residence. If any member of a council or lodge within this jurisdiction shall be present at or aid and assist in giving or receiving any of the sublime or symbolic degrees in a clandestine or irregular manner, contrary to the true intent and meaning of the statutes and regulations of the said Supreme Grand Council, or of the constitutions and laws of true, ancient, free, or accepted Masonry, he shall be expelled. And any sublime Freemason in and under this jurisdiction who shall come to the knowledge of such illegal proceedings shall immediately give information of the same to the lodge or council to which he belongs, under the penalty of suspension, that the honor, dignity, and legality of our illustrious order may be maintained, and the degrees of our ancient and accepted rite be preserved in their purity and integrity. A prince of Jerusalem who visits an inferior council or lodge should present himself clothed with the dress and ornaments of a prince. And when his approach is announced, the presiding officer must send a prince of Jerusalem to examine him. And if the officer report in his favor, he shall be received under the arch of steel and be escorted by 4 brethren and seated on the right hand of the presiding officer. An entry of his name and rank must be made on the minutes, that he may thereafter receive due honor without examination. Princes have the right of being covered in all subordinate lodges, chapters, or councils, and of addressing the chair without first asking permission. The officers of all councils of princes of Jerusalem shall, in conformity with ancient usage, be styled and take rank as follows. 1. Most equitable sovereign prince master. 2. High priest. 3. Most enlightened senior warden. 4. Most enlightened junior warden. 5. Valorous keeper of the seals and archives. 6. Valorous treasurer. 7. Valorous master of the ceremonies. 8. Valorous master of the entrances. 9. Valorous tiler. At least 5 members are necessary to form a quorum for the transaction of business. The annual meeting shall take place on a day to be fixed by the council, and stated meetings at such other times as shall be determined on. The officers shall be elected at the previous meeting and installed at the annual meeting. No one shall be a member of any council of princes in this jurisdiction who is not a member of a lodge of perfection under the superintendence of such council. It shall be the duty of every council of princes in this jurisdiction to inspect and watch over, with due care and fidelity, any and every lodge of perfection placed under its superintendence, and see that this work is done in conformity with the regulations and landmarks of the order. Every council of princes in this jurisdiction shall, for and in the name of the Supreme Grand Council of the 33rd and last degree of the ancient and accepted rite for England and Wales and the dependencies of the British Crown, administer to all brethren admitted to any of the degrees conferred in their council of princes and in the lodges of perfection under their superintendence, an obligation of fealty and allegiance to the said Supreme Grand Council, and submission to its decrees, and shall annually, immediately after their election of officers, transmit to the said Supreme Grand Council every such obligation so taken, or a duplicate thereof to be deposited in its archives. Every letter of application from a Grand Elect, Perfect, and Sublime Mason for the degrees of Knight of the East or Prince of Jerusalem shall be accompanied with a certificate from the Treasurer of the Lodge of Perfection, of which the applicant is a member, that all arrears of the applicant are paid up in the said lodge, and shall enclose the required fee for elevation to those degrees. In the event of the rejection of any candidate, the amount of his enclosure shall be returned to him. Notices of all suspensions and expulsions shall be given to the said Supreme Grand Council, as well as to all councils and lodges of inferior degree within the district. No appeal in any case of suspension or expulsion can be made to the Supreme Grand Council from any lodge of perfection, until the matter in question shall have been submitted to the examination and decision of the Council of Princes of Jerusalem superintending such lodge. The officers of lodges of perfection shall, in conformity with the most ancient usage, be styled and take rank as follows: 1. Thrice potent master. 2. Hiram king of Tyre, his deputy. 3. Senior warden. 4. Junior warden. 5. Keeper of the seals. 6. Treasurer. 7. Secretary. 8. Orator. 9. Master of ceremonies. 10. Captain of the guards. The thrice potent on each election night shall appoint 1 or 2 tilers, also an almoner. The annual meeting shall take place on a day to be fixed by the lodge, and stated meetings at such other times as shall be determined on. The officers shall be elected at the previous meeting and installed at the annual meeting. At all receptions, the orator shall make discourses in illustration of the order, shall instruct the new brethren, and explain to them the mysteries, and exhort them to continue their zeal, fervor, and constancy. If he has observed any indiscretion or dispute, he shall inform the lodge of it and take measures accordingly. If a brother is a prey to misfortune, it is the duty of every brother to endeavor to alleviate his distress. The almoner shall have the custody of the fund arising from the voluntary contributions of each night. He shall, before the closing of the lodge, solicit the charitable contributions of the members. The sums so received shall be distributed by the thrice potent and almoner, and shall be entered on the minutes at the next meeting of the lodge. If any brother is taken sick, and it shall come to the knowledge of any member, he shall give early advice of it to the almoner and to the lodge, that necessary succor may be administered. Should a brother die, all the brethren, if requested, are obliged to attend and assist at his funeral in the usual manner. It is most proper that the lodge be then opened in the perfect master's degree. Secrecy in reference to our mysteries, as well as the transactions of the lodge regarding the character of a brother or applicant, being an indispensable obligation, the thrice potent shall always, before closing the lodge, remind the brethren of their duty in this respect and enforce it in the usual manner and form. It shall be the duty of every lodge of perfection to place itself under the superintendence of the Council of Princes of Jerusalem sitting at its east. It shall also be the duty of every lodge annually to make the reports and returns to such Council of Princes. It is not the rule at present to practice any of the degrees below the 18th degree, hence our explanations, being derived from a variety of sources, partly written and partly oral, may not be considered precisely agreeable to some authorities, but in the main they will not be found to differ very widely. We must necessarily derive our authority from French sources. Brother the Reverend Dr. Oliver, speaking upon this subject, says, "The ineffable degrees are little known or esteemed in this country, for the evidences on which they rest are of doubtful authority. Nor are these evidences essential to the well-being of Freemasonry, because the system is perfect without them, and they contain no typical references of any value either to improve the morals or amend the heart. We cannot in this matter entirely agree with our Reverend Brother, since we find that at this time the 2 degrees most practiced, viz. the Rose-Croix and the Kadosh, are both well known and highly estimated, and as to the evidences of the degrees we are about to describe, although the greater part are certainly derived from sources not entirely trustworthy, some few have as certain an origin as other traditions, the authenticity of which is not disputed. And in answer to Brother Oliver's last objection, we quote a small portion of one of the lectures. What is the disposition of an elect, perfect and sublime Mason? To keep his heart divested of jealousy, revenge, and every other evil passion. To be always ready to communicate benefits, and to have a tongue of good report. What kind of behavior is recommended to you? The most profound respect and submission to authority. Why are all Masons considered to be on equality? Because they are equally subject to that divine being who is represented in our lodges by the sacred and ineffable name and by the equilateral triangle. The address which belongs to the ineffable degrees, derived from Brother Dalcho, is, as Brother Oliver himself allows, worthy of being adopted in the symbolic degrees. The craft masons use it in a royal arch chapter, and slightly altered it is adopted by the mark masters. Brethren, you are now about to quit this sacred retreat of friendship and virtue to mix again with the world. Amidst its concerns and employments, forget not the duties you have heard so frequently inculcated and forcibly recommended in the lodge. Be therefore diligent, prudent, temperate, and discreet. Remember also that around this altar you solemnly and repeatedly promise to befriend and relieve, with unhesitating cordiality, so far as shall lie in your power, every brother who shall need your assistance, that you have promised to remind him, in the most tender manner, of his failings, and aid his reformation. Vindicate his character when wrongfully accused, suggest in his behalf the most candid, favorable, and palliating circumstances, when his conduct is justly reprehended, that the world may observe how Masons love one another. These generous principles are to extend farther. Every human being has a claim upon your kind offices, so that we enjoin it upon you to do good unto all, while we recommend it more especially to the household of the faithful. By diligence in the duties of your respective callings, by liberal benevolence and diffusive charity, by constancy and fidelity in your friendships, by uniformly just, amiable, and virtuous deportment, discover the beneficial and happy effects of this ancient and honorable institution. Let it not be supposed that you have here labored in vain and spent your strength for naught, for your work is with the Lord, and your recompense with your God. Finally, brethren, farewell. Be ye all of one mind, live in peace, and may the God of love and peace delight to dwell with and to bless you. But inasmuch as Masonry is professed in those nations which have not yet been converted to the Christian faith, and as it enkindles benevolence and excites virtue, so accordant with the genius of the gospel, it may eventually have no inconsiderable tendency towards introducing and propagating among them that most glorious system of revealed truth. At least by humanizing the disposition, softening the manners, and removing the prejudices, may prepare the way for that most desirable event. In like manner to St. John the Baptist, who, our traditions assure us he was the first Christian Mason, was commissioned to prepare the way of the Lord, to smooth the road, and remove the obstructions to the introduction of his truth. The sublime degrees included in these rites, to which all the highly educated and intellectual of our fraternity aspire, imply the recognition, and cannot be attained but through the acknowledgement, of Christianity. From our description of the several degrees, our readers will discover that in some, the canon of Scripture is the authority, in others, the apocryphal books. Hence, if no other advantage is derived from a knowledge of the rite, at least it opens a vast field of inquiry to the diligent Mason. The brother who is admitted to the ancient and accepted rite derives in foreign lodges great benefit from its acquisition. Without the Rose-Croix, a Mason is held in but little esteem on the continent. We must remark that there are two systems adopted in France, the one identical with that practiced in England, the other more usually designated the French Rite and the Grand Orient. In the latter are 7 degrees, 3 symbolic and 4 higher, viz. The 3 first, craft, the 4th, the elect, the 5th, the Scotch master, the 6th, the Knight of the East, and the 7th, the Rose-Croix. This rite is also practiced in Brazil. It was founded in 1786 by the Grand Orient of France. With this introduction, we shall now proceed to give some account of each degree, commencing with the 4th degree of the rite, which is the first conferred by the Council, and is called Secret Master. In it is explained the mystic signification of those things which are contained in the sanctum sanctorum of the tabernacle and the temple, viz. The altar of incense, the golden candlestick and the table of shewbread, and also within the second veil, the ark of the testimony and its lid and cover called the mercy seat. For the forms of these holy things we have, besides the lucid description in the book of Exodus chapter 25, the authority of a bas-relief on the Arch of Titus at Rome, which was doubtless copied from the originals taken to that city by the triumphant army of the conqueror after the destruction of Jerusalem. And although the ornaments which adorned the Temple of Solomon became a prey to the Chaldeans, if they were not, as is highly probable, all restored by Cyrus on the return of the Jews to their native land, it is certain that those used in the service of the Second Temple were of a like pattern. The master in this degree, as in the symbolic, represents Solomon, who now comes to the temple to elect 7 experts or skillful practiced masons to replace the loss of an illustrious character. The master is styled most powerful. There is one warden, who represents Adoniram, the overseer of the workmen on Mount Lebanon, and who was the first secret master. The lodge is clothed in black and illuminated by 81 lights. The badge is white with a black edging having a blue flap, on which an all-seeing eye is placed. The jewel of the degree is an ivory key, suspended from a white ribbon edged with black. On the key is engraved the letter Z, referring to Zadok, who was the high priest in the reigns of David and Solomon. Perfect Master. The 5th degree is that of Perfect Master, and may be said to be a continuation of the preceding, being a tribute of respect to the worthy departed brother. In this, the Right Worshipful Master represents Adoniram. He has also but one warden, who is called Inspector. The deacon, or conductor as he is called, represents Zabdiel, who was the father of Jashobeam, the first captain of the guards, as mentioned in the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 27, verse 2. The Hebrew of the 2nd book of Samuel, which speaks of Jashobeam, runs literally thus: He who sat in the throne of wisdom, the head of the 3, Adino of Esni, who lifted up his spear against 300, whom he slew at one time. The badge is white, in the center of which is embroidered within 3 circles a square stone or cube, on which the letter J is placed. The flap of the apron is green, symbolically to remind the Perfect Master that, being dead in vice, he must hope to revive in virtue. The jewel is a compass extended 60 degrees to teach him to act within measure and ever pay due regard to justice and equity. The Perfect Master's degree is founded on this traditional event. At the death of Hiram, the widow's son Solomon, being desirous of paying a tribute of respect to his friend, requested Adoniram, the Grand Inspector, to make arrangements for his interment. The latter erected a superb tomb and obelisk of black and white marble, which he finished in 9 days. The entrance to the tomb was between 2 pillars, supporting a square stone surrounded by 3 circles, on which was engraved the letter J. The heart of the deceased was enclosed in a golden urn, to the side of which a triangular stone was fixed, inscribed with the letters JMB within a wreath of cassia. The urn was placed on the top of the obelisk. 3 days after the interment, Solomon visited the tomb, and with solemn ceremonies, in the presence of the brethren, offered up a prayer, and with hands and eyes elevated to heaven exclaimed, "It is accomplished." Intimate Secretary. The 6th degree is the Intimate Secretary. In this there are only 3 officers who represent Solomon, king of Israel, Hiram of Tyre, and a captain of the guards. The ceremonial and legend are intended to preserve the remembrance of an instance of unlawful curiosity, the due punishment of the offender being averted only in consideration of his previous fidelity. Our brethren will readily perceive that these 3 degrees are a kind of commentary upon the historical traditions of the Master Mason's degree, all having some reference to the event symbolized in that degree. The collar is crimson, an apron white with red border. On the flap is a triangle. The jewel is a triple triangle interlaced. In the degree of Intimate Secretary, the 2 persons who represent Solomon and Hiram of Tyre are clothed in blue mantles lined with ermine, with crowns on their heads, scepters in their hands, and seated at a table on which are 2 naked swords, a roll of parchment, and a human skull. The rest of the brethren are considered only as perfect masters and are termed guards. They wear white aprons, lined and embroidered with crimson, and strings of the same with crimson collars, to which is suspended a solid triangle. The degree relates to circumstances that occurred between Hiram and Joabet, when the fidelity of the latter was rewarded by Solomon with advancement to this rank. The candidate is invested in open lodge and thus addressed by his superior. My brother, I receive you as an intimate secretary on your promise to be faithful to the order into which you have just been admitted, and I trust that your fidelity will be proof against every temptation. I present you with a sword as a weapon of defense against the attacks of those who may try to extort from you the secrets which I am now about to communicate. There is a tracing board which is thus explained. The window in the clouds represents the vault of the temple, and the letter J which you see inscribed therein indicates the tetragrammaton, or sacred name of God. The door represents the principal entrance from the palace. The tiers symbolize the repentance of Joabert in Solomon's chamber of audience, and are also emblematical of the lamentations of the king, in the apartment hung with black, where he used to retire to lament the unhappy fate of Hiram, and here it was he received the king of Tyre. Provost and judge. This is the designation of the 7th degree. Traditional history relates its foundation by King Solomon for the purpose of strengthening his means of preserving order among the vast number of craftsmen engaged in the construction of the temple. The presiding officer of the lodge represents Tito, who was the first of the 300 overseers called Haredim, a Hebrew word which signifies princes or provosts, as mentioned in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 5, verse 16. In this degree there are 6 lights which are so placed as to form a double triangle. The badge is white lined with red and has a pocket, the collar is red. To it is suspended the jewel, a golden key on the wards of which is engraved the letter A. This degree appears out of place, as it has reference solely to the very first preparations for building the temple, whereas those preceding it are connected with its construction and completion. Connected as these 4 degrees are with the historical traditions of the 3rd degree, with the exception of the anachronism to which we are about to refer, they are unobjectionable and somewhat instructive. Are these traditions to be found in Preston's 4 sections of the 3rd degree? Whence is derived the cognomen Tito? It is clearly Latin or Italian. Provost comes from the Latin prepositus, which denotes the chief of any society or community. The French word prévôt comes nearest to the form of the word, and the English expression provost marshal, an officer attached to the army whose duty it is to seize and punish offenders against military discipline, has been adopted from the French prévôt des maréchaux, an officer who has similar functions. It has been suggested as probable that this degree was instituted among the Masonic Crusaders, as it has more especial connection with military government. The word provost is in England rarely used. We believe the only instances are those of the heads of certain colleges, etc. In Scotland, it designates the chief magistrate in corporate cities, as the Lord Provost of Edinburgh, Glasgow, etc. Intendant of buildings. The 8th degree is called Intendant of Buildings, or Master in Israel. The chief officers are a thrice puissant, who represents King Solomon, the senior warden called Inspector, representing Tito, the chief of the Haredim, and the junior warden who represents Adoniram. This arrangement of the wardens would seem anomalous, as Adoniram was set over the levy of 30,000 men sent by Solomon to Lebanon, while the Haredim were the 300 overseers. The historical legend of this degree also affirms that the object of its institution was to supply the loss of Hiram, the widow's son. The badge is white, bordered with green and red. On the center is a star of 9 points, and on the flap a triangle with the initial of the degree. The lodge is illuminated by 27 lights in 3 groups. The most noticeable character of this degree is the metaphorical use of the 5 points of fellowship in conjunction with the 5 orders of architecture. An intendant of buildings, we are told, must have made the 5 steps of exactness, penetrated the inmost part of the temple, and beheld the great light containing the 3 mysterious characters. The intendant of buildings, according to the modern acceptation of terms, is doubtless a most important office. But that post was filled most ably by Adoniram, and as there was but one building, the Haredim were under his control. Thus viewed, without better foundation than we are at present possessed of, the degree seems unsatisfactory. Elect of 9. The 9th degree is elect of 9. At this point we observe for the first time that the body is termed a chapter. The chief officer is called Most Wise. He represents King Solomon. The second officer is the King of Tyre, Most Puissant. The badge is of white satin with a broad black border. On it are embroidered the emblems of the degree. The sash is black, bearing on it 9 red roses. The jewel is a small poignard. The lodge represents the secret chamber of King Solomon. It is illuminated by 9 lights of yellow wax. The lodge is called the Council of 9 Masters. The object of this degree is to exhibit the mode in which certain overseers who, in order prematurely and improperly to obtain the knowledge of a superior degree, engaged in an execrable deed of villainy, receive their punishment. It exemplifies the truth of the maxim that the punishment of crime, though sometimes slow, is ever sure. And it admonishes us by the historical circumstances on which it is founded, of the binding nature of our Masonic obligation. The symbolic colors in the regalia are white, red, and black. The white being emblematic of the purity of the knights, the red of the atrocious crime committed, and the black of grief for its results. In the French Rite, this is the 4th degree. It requires 3 chambers and in some respects has similitude to the 17th degree of the ancient and accepted Rite, being also preparatory to the Rose-Croix. It is evident that the degree is an important one. Elect of 15, or Illustrious Elect of 15, the 10th degree, also holds its meetings under the designation of chapters, and in this the historical tradition, comprising the continuation and conclusion of the punishment inflicted on the traitors who, just before the completion of the temple, had committed a crime of the most atrocious character, is more completely developed. The 3 principal officers are a most illustrious master, an inspector, and the introductor. The symbolic color of the badge and collar is black strewed with tears. Sublime Elect. The 11th degree is that of Sublime Elect, sometimes called 12 Illustrious Knights. This would appear to designate a new era in Masonry, as after vengeance had been taken upon the traitors mentioned in the preceding degrees, Solomon, to reward those who had remained faithful to their trust, as well as to make room for the exaltation of others to the degree of Elect of 15, appointed 12 of these latter, chosen by their companions, to constitute a new degree on which he bestowed the name of Sublime Elect, and endowed them with a certain command over the workmen who were, in imitation of the tribes of Israel, divided into 12 companies. The Sublime Elect rendered to Solomon daily an account of the work that was done in the temple by their respective companies, and received the payment for them. The assembly is called a Grand Chapter. The presiding officer represents King Solomon, whose name he bears as thrice puissant. His 2 chief officers are a Grand Inspector and a Grand Master of Ceremonies. The apron is white, with a black border and lining, and on the flap is a red cross. There is also a black sash suspended from the right shoulder to the left hip, and on it hearts in flames. The costume resembles very closely that of the Knights Templar, differing only in the emblem. The room or place of meeting, which is called a Grand Chapter, is hung with black. We believe this degree is included with 2 others in the 4th of the French Rite. The title of Knights naturally suggests the idea that this degree could not have been formed before the Christian era, and is favorable to the suggestion that it was instituted by the military orders in Palestine. This degree in some form appears in different rites, and as 3 words belonging to it were adopted by the framers of the present Holy Royal Arch, there is every reason to suppose it was an important step in the high grades. Grand Master Architect is the denomination of the 12th degree. In this, the principles of operative masonry become prominent. It is a purely scientific degree in which the rules of architecture and the connection of the liberal arts with masonry are dwelt upon. Although the lectures on the Fellow Craft degree illustrate architecture from the same point of view, the subject is susceptible of great extension, and under the Grand Master Architect, numerous details illustrative of the temple dedicated to the Most High by the wisest man might be worked out. In the absence of distinct information upon many points, there is some exercise for the imagination in furnishing a complete description of the Temple of Solomon. which we must conclude was an astonishing and magnificent work for the time in which it was built, and it seems to have been distinguished from all other temples of remote antiquity by its sumptuousness of detail. The officers of this degree are the master, who is denominated most powerful, and two wardens. The chapter is decorated with red and white hangings. The ornaments are the columns of the 5 orders of architecture, and a case of mathematical instruments. The jewel is a gold medal, on one side of which, in high relief, the 5 orders are represented. On the other, a cube with triangle and other appropriate devices. This is suspended by a blue ribbon. We think that every Mason who carefully studies the subject will agree with us that this degree ought not to be laid aside. If it is not in its present state so full of interest as might be desired, the works of Josephus, Strabo, Calmet, and others afford abundance of illustrative materials of which the compilers of the Fellowcraft lecture have made no use. The degree might also become a useful school of instruction in practical architecture, and by diffusing a correct taste among the fraternity, and through them among the world at large, prevent the execution of unsightly structures and confusion of styles. But we must remark that the degree, so far as we can learn, never has been practiced. Master of the 9th Arch. The 13th degree is denominated the Master of the 9th Arch, and sometimes the ancient Royal Arch of Solomon. The historical traditions of this degree are represented as affording copious information on certain points in which the sacred volume is not entirely free from obscurity, and these have reference to the mode in which Enoch, notwithstanding the destruction caused by the deluge and the lapse of ages, was enabled to preserve important secrets that eventually were to be communicated to the first possessors of this degree. The Book of Enoch is one of the Hebrew scriptures designated apocryphal, that is, hidden books, from the fact that after the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem by the Romans, the Jews, having established their sacred archives at Tiberias, hid there in a cell such books as it was considered expedient to withdraw from public inspection. The scriptures, now known as canonical, were deposited in a new chest, or Ark of the Covenant. But those holy books, which were not included in this receptacle, and which at the close of the 1st century were suppressed by the Jews and thus concealed, were called the Apocrypha. The motive for this proceeding is said to be that the predictions of the Messiah's advent and reign on earth contained in the Book of Enoch are so direct and incontrovertible that it was on this account concealed. The Book of Enoch appears to have been read by both Jews and Christians in the apostolic age. And this is seen in that passage of St. Jude's writings in which he says, "And Enoch also, the 7th from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." The Book of Enoch existed until the 8th century, when it unaccountably disappeared, save some fragments. Until in 1774, Bruce brought from Abyssinia 3 complete and beautiful copies of what was asserted to be the long-lost book. One of these he presented to the Bodleian Library, and from this, in 1826, Dr. Lawrence, professor of Hebrew, afterwards Archbishop of Cashel, produced a complete translation. The subject matter of the book consists chiefly of relations of Enoch's prophetical and celestial visions, in the most remarkable of which the angel Uriel shows to the prophet various mysterious scenes in heaven, including a survey and explanation of the solar and lunar revolutions according to the ancient astrological theory. Eusebius tells us that the Babylonians acknowledged Enoch as the inventor of astrology, and that he is the Atlas of the Greeks, who communicated to that people the knowledge of astronomy and the celestial globe. Tertullian endeavors to show that the Book of Enoch was preserved by Noah during the deluge. There have been many treatises by the learned on this book, but it must be allowed that although occasionally religious and moral precepts are enjoined, all sense of propriety is shocked by such preposterous combinations as continually appear in what is presented to us as the Book of Enoch, so that in comparison, even the metamorphoses of the pagan mythology appear to be rational. This explanation we consider necessary, as although the 13th degree is represented as most interesting and impressive. Yet if its ritual be based upon the authority of the work described, we as English Masons cannot admit it to be of any great value. The officers of this degree, which in France is called Royal Arch, are a thrice puissant Grand Master who represents King Solomon. Hiram, King of Tyre, is also represented, attired as a traveler. There is a Grand Treasurer representing Gibeon, a Grand Secretary representing Joabert, and a Grand Inspector who represents Stolkin. Who these worthies were, we are unable to learn. The badge is white with purple border. The jewel, a triangle, has in center a representation of two people letting down a third through a square opening into an arch. English Royal Arch Masons must understand that this is the only Royal Arch degree of the continent. Grand Scotch Knight, Lodge of Perfection, is the denomination now given in England to the 14th degree, but it appears to have been first called in the Scotch Rite Grand Elect, Perfect and Sublime Mason. In the United States it is designated Perfection. In France it is called Grand Scotch Mason of Perfection of the Sacred Vault of James VI. The degree is considered to be the ultimate rite of ancient Masonry, as it is the last of the ineffable degrees that refer to the first temple. Its officers are a thrice potent master who represents King Solomon, Hiram, King of Tyre, his deputy, two wardens, keeper of the seals, a treasurer, secretary, master of ceremonies, and captain of the guards. The apron is white with red flames bordered with blue and bearing the jewel on the flap. The jewel is a pair of compasses extended on an arc of 90 degrees, surmounted by a crown with a sun in the center. Brother Mackay gives the following history of this degree. By the completion of the temple, the masons who had been employed in constructing it acquired immortal honor. Their order became more uniformly established and regulated than it had previously been. Their caution and reserve in admitting new members produced respect, and merit alone was required of the candidate. With these principles instilled into their minds, many of the Grand Elect left the temple after its dedication, and dispersing themselves among the neighboring nations, instructed all who applied and were found worthy in the sublime degrees of ancient craft Masonry. The temple was completed in the year of the world 3000. Thus far, the wise king of Israel had proved worthy of his great office and gained universal admiration. But in process of time, when he had advanced in years, his understanding became impaired. He grew deaf to the voice of the Lord and was strangely irregular in his conduct. The Lord, who had appeared to Solomon in a dream after the dedication of the temple, assured him he had accepted the building to be his house of sacrifice. He promised to bless him and his posterity if they were constant in his worship. If they did not remain faithful, he would certainly punish them and destroy the sacred edifice. The reign of Solomon was most prosperous. Peace and plenty blessed the land. He extended the commerce of the country and fitted out a fleet with which, aided by mariners from Tyre, he traded to Ophir for valuable commodities and the precious metals. His extended power and influence at length corrupted his virtue. He plunged into all manner of licentiousness, and the latter actions of his life inflicted a deep disgrace on his character. He took wives and concubines from among the idolatrous nations around him, who perverted his heart so that he worshipped Ashtoreth of the Sidonians, Moloch of the Ammonites, and Chemosh of the Moabites, to whom he built temples on the Mount of Olives, and the people, following his example, soon neglected the worship of the true God for that of idols. The Grand Elect and Perfect Masons saw this and were sorely grieved, afraid that his apostasy would end in some dreadful consequences and bring upon them those enemies whom Solomon had before defied. The day of the vengeance of the Most High did come. Jeroboam headed a rebellion against the king, and 30 years after the completion of the temple, Solomon died, and Rehoboam, his son by one of his Ammonite wives, succeeded. 10 of the tribes revolted, and Shishak, king of Egypt, came with an army, carried off the treasures of the Lord's house and all the king's gold and silver, laying waste the whole country. After the lapse of 4 centuries from the death of Solomon, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, sent his general Nebuzaradan with an army which desolated Judea with fire and sword. They took and sacked Jerusalem, razed the wall of the city, and destroyed the temple. The conquerors carried the people captives to Babylon, leaving only a remnant of the lower class to till the land. All the degrees which we have thus described are conferred by name in a body called the Lodge of Perfection when the Rose Croix is given, and included in the certificate of that degree. It is scarcely necessary for us to mention that the Royal Arch degree as such forms no part of the ancient and accepted rite, but its principles are doubtless to be found in the 13th and 14th degrees, and although the present ritual differs very much from that in use previous to 1813, the Royal Arch, as far as we can discover, has for a very long period formed part of Masonic ceremonial in Great Britain. We understand that it is intended by the Supreme Council to work this degree as one governing craft Masonry. In the degree of perfection which is practiced in the United States, among the decorations of the lodge room is a transparency placed behind the chair of the master, representing a burning bush enveloping a triangle and the letters YHVH in the center of the fire. In the west is a pillar of beauty. The pedestal is formed from the fragments of Enoch's pillar, which, being found in the ruins, were put together for that purpose. On a table is placed bread and wine and gold rings for the newly admitted brother. The position of the companions when seated forms a triangle, and the 24 lights are placed 3 and 5 in the west, 7 in the north, and 9 in the south. The so-called historical lecture of this degree contains the following passages. At the death of Solomon, his kingdom was rent asunder, and 10 of the tribes severed from the dominion of his son. But the evil did not rest here, for the fascinations and pleasures of the latitudinarian system, which had so long prevailed under the influence of Solomon's pernicious example, had become so agreeable to his subjects that the whole 10 tribes soon became confirmed idolaters. Nor did Judah and Benjamin escape the infection. When the time arrived that the Christian princes determined to free the Holy Land from the infidels, virtuous Masons voluntarily offered their services, on the condition that they should have a chief of their own election, which was granted. The valor and fortitude of those elected knights was such that they were admired by all the princes of Jerusalem, who, believing that these mysteries inspired them with courage and virtue, were desirous of being initiated. The Masons complied with their request, and thus the royal art became popular and honorable, was diffused throughout these various dominions, and has continued to spread through a succession of ages to the present time. Whenever a lodge of perfection was held, 9 knights of the 9th arch tiled the 9 arches which led to the sacred vaults, and so on in regular progression, the youngest taking his station at the 1st arch, which was near the apartment of Solomon. None were suffered to pass without giving the passwords of the different arches. There were living at that time several ancient masters who, excited by jealousy at the honors conferred upon the 25 brethren, deputed some of their number to wait upon Solomon and request that they might participate in those honors. The king answered that the 25 masters were justly entitled to the honors conferred on them, because they were zealous and faithful, and gave them also hopes that one day they would be rewarded according to their merits. This answer was not satisfactory, and one of the deputies warmly observed, "What occasion have we for a higher degree? We know that the word has been changed, but we can still travel as masters and receive a master mason's wages." Solomon mildly replied that those whom he had advanced to the degree of perfection had wrought in the difficult and dangerous work of the ancient ruins, had penetrated the bowels of the earth, and brought thence treasures to enrich and adorn the temple of God, and desired the petitioners to go in peace and aspire to perfection by good works. The deputies returned and reported their reception to the masters. These masters, displeased at the refusal, unanimously determined to go to the ancient ruins and search in the bowels of the earth, that they might have good pretext for making a reapplication to Solomon for the required honors. The very next morning they removed the cubicle stone and descended into the cavern with a ladder of ropes by the light of torches. But no sooner had they all arrived at the bottom than the whole 9 arches fell in upon them. The king, hearing of this accident, sent Joabad, Gibbulum, and Stolkin to make inquiries into the circumstance. At break of day they went to the place, but saw no remains of the arches, nor could they learn that any one of those who had descended had escaped to tell the tale. They carefully examined the spot, but found nothing except a few pieces of marble inscribed with hieroglyphics, by which Solomon discovered that these fragments formed a part of one of the pillars of Enoch. The two oldest lodges of perfection in America were one at Albany, constituted December 20th, 1767, by the thrice puissant brother Henry Andrew Franken, DG Inspector General from Kingston in Jamaica, and the other at Holmes's Hole, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. In our brief account of these degrees, of course, we leave the brethren to form their own conclusions as to the value of any part of them. But since we know the source of this 14th degree, and as its contriver's name is rather conspicuous in the Masonic history of the last century, the introduction here of a notice of a remarkable individual will not appear out of place. The Chevalier Ramsay was born at Ayr in Scotland in 1686, and in early life went to France, where he became the intimate friend and associate of the celebrated Fenelon. He is said to have been a man of most extensive erudition, and to have cultivated most of the known sciences. Being of a restless and ambitious disposition, he engaged actively in political intrigues and particularly devoted himself to the cause of the exiled princes of the House of Stuart, and conceived the idea of making use of the Masonic Association to subserve the interests of their party. With this end in view, he endeavored to obviate the objections of the French noblesse to the mechanical origin of the institution, at which their pride revolted, by asserting that it arose in the Holy Land during the Crusades as an order of chivalry. His theory was that the first Freemasons were a society of knights whose business it was to rebuild the churches which had been destroyed by the Saracens, that the infidels, with the view of preventing the execution of this pious design, sent emissaries among them, who, disguised as Christians, became confounded with the builders and paralyzed their efforts. That the knights, having discovered the existence of these spies, became in future more careful and instituted signs and words for the purpose of detection, and that as many of their workmen were newly converted Christians, they adopted symbolic ceremonies with a view of instructing their proselytes more readily in the new religion. Finally, upon the Saracens gaining the upper hand, the Knights Masons were compelled to abandon their original occupation. But being invited by the King of England to remove into his dominions, they had accepted the offer, and in this secure retreat devoted themselves to the cultivation and encouragement of architecture, sculpture, painting, and music. In 1728, Ramsay attempted to lay the foundation of this new, and according to his idea improved, system of masonry, and proposed to the Grand Lodge of England to substitute in place of the three ancient degrees others of his own invention, but which he asserted had been practiced for time immemorial in the Lodge of St. Andrew at Edinburgh. His views being rejected in London, he carried them to Paris, where his degrees were adopted not indeed as a substitute for, but as an addition to, ancient craft masonry. These degrees became popular and in a short time gave birth to numerous others on the continent of Europe. The splendor of the decorations and the gorgeous manner in which the ceremonials were conducted captivating the senses. Ere long they fell into oblivion. Knight of the Sword and the East, which is the 15th degree, and especially refers to those valiant masons who, with trowels in hand and swords by their sides, were ever ready and prepared to construct and defend the holy city and sanctuary, would appear to be one of very considerable interest, as it is founded on the circumstance of the assistance rendered by Darius to the Jews, who, liberated from their captivity, had been prevented by their enemies after the death of Cyrus from achieving their purpose of rebuilding the temple. In this degree, the meetings are designated councils, and an important change takes place in the symbolic colors adopted. The hangings of the council chamber are water green, in allusion to a circumstance hereafter referred to. The chamber is illuminated by 72 lights, in memory of the 72 years' captivity. The sash is a green watered ribbon, worn across the body from the right shoulder to the left hip, the figure of a bridge being in the front, having on it the letters Y and H. There are also sometimes other emblems painted on the ribbon. The apron is white, lined with red and bordered with green, and has on it emblems of war and its consequences. From scripture and tradition is derived the following legend of this degree. The Knights of the East derive their origin from the captivity when the whole land was a desolation and an astonishment, and the nation did serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And when the 70 years were accomplished, the Israelites were restored to liberty by Cyrus, in fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah. This prophecy was very remarkable, for it not only fixed the date for the return of the Hebrew people to their own land, but also for the overthrow of the Babylonian monarchy. It shall come to pass, when the 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it a perpetual desolation. And the last words of the prophet declare, Thus shall Babylon sink, and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her. But to return to the historical events said to be connected with this degree, Cyrus permitted the Jews to return to Jerusalem for the purpose of rebuilding the temple, and he caused all the holy vessels and ornaments which had been carried away by Nebuzaradan to be restored and brought again unto the temple which is at Jerusalem, everyone to his place, and placed them in the house of God, as mentioned in the book of Ezra, chapter 6, verse 5. The king committed the charge of the holy vessels, as well as of the returning captives, to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. This is the Babylonian name of Zerubbabel, who was of the royal line of David and a direct ancestor of our Lord Jesus Christ. When the Israelitish captives were assembled, they numbered 42,360, exclusive of slaves and servants, amounting to 7,337. This traditional history relates that Zerubbabel, for the protection of his people, armed 7,000 masons and placed them in the van to repel such as should oppose their march to Judea. Their march was unimpeded as far as the banks of the Euphrates, where they found an armed force opposed to their passage. A conflict ensued, and the enemy was cut to pieces or drowned at the passage of the bridge. The emblematic color of the degree is in allusion to this circumstance. The journey occupied 4 months, and in 7 days from their arrival, the work of restoring the temple was commenced. The workmen were divided into classes, over each of which a chief with 2 assistants was placed. Every degree of each class was paid according to its rank, and each class had its distinctive modes of recognition. The works had scarcely commenced before the workmen were disturbed by the neighboring Samaritans, who were determined to oppose the reconstruction of the edifice. Zerubbabel therefore ordered, as a measure of precaution, that the masons should work with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other, that they might be able at any moment to defend themselves from the attacks of their enemies. The second temple occupied 46 years in its construction and was consecrated in a like manner to that of the Temple of Solomon. Those masons who constructed it were created by Cyrus Knights of the East, and hence the title of this degree. This appears in both the French Rites. In the Grand Orient it is the 6th degree. In both it is termed Knight of the East. The assembly is called a council. Everything bears a Hebrew character. There are the candlestick with 7 branches, the brazen sea, and the table of shewbread, etc. There are 70 lights in memory of the 70 years' captivity. The chief of the council is designated sovereign and represents Cyrus, king of Persia. The second officer is Nehemiah the chancellor, Esdras is the grand orator, Mithridates the grand treasurer, and there is also a grand general. Zerubbabel and 2 others appear to receive the authority from the king of Persia to rebuild the holy city and sanctuary. The sash, which is worn from right to left, is water green, and on it are embroidered the symbols of the degree. To it is attached a small poignard. The apron is white satin with green border. The green color has reference to the river Euphrates. Grand Prince of Jerusalem, which is the 16th degree, is founded on certain incidents which took place during the rebuilding of the Second Temple, at which time the Jews were much annoyed by the attacks of the neighboring nations, as mentioned in the legend of the 15th degree. The assembly is called the Grand Council, and the apartment should be separated into 2 parts. In the first is represented Darius the king, seated on a blue dais. This part represents the city of Babylon, and it should be hung with red. The other part represents the city of Jerusalem, where Zerubbabel presides. In this degree, the fact of the valiant masons who at the building of the second temple were armed with sword and shield to protect the workmen is especially referred to. The saloons are illuminated by 25 candles in groups of 5. We find the following passage in the book of Ezra, chapter 4. The people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building. It goes on to say that these enemies obtained a letter from King Artaxerxes saying, "Give ye now commandment to cause these men to cease, and that this city be not builded until another commandment shall be given from me." And so it ceased until the 2nd year of the reign of King Darius, when the Israelites sent an embassy to that potentate to implore his protection and permission to resume the work, and succeeded in gaining the object of their petition. The emblematic color of the degree is yellow. The apron, which is red, being bordered and lined with that color. The flap is yellow, having on it a balance on which are the letters D and Z. The jewel is a gold medal with a like emblem, and on the reverse a 2-edged sword and 5 stars. It is in contemplation to work this degree in England. The first Grand Council of Princes of Jerusalem, of which we find any record, was formed at Charleston, in the United States in 1788, and took the control of all subordinate degrees up to the 15th. The council confers on a candidate for the 18th degree all the degrees by name from the 4th to the 16th, previous to his being eligible for the 17th. The statutes enact that the Council of Princes of Jerusalem have a right to visit all lodges up to the 15th degree. Knight of the East and West, which is the 17th degree, is entirely chivalric and, as far as can be at present discovered, makes no pretense in its history to ancient Freemasonry. Its inventors asserted that it was organized by the knights engaged in the Crusades, that in 1118, the same year that the Order of the Temple was instituted, 11 knights took the vows of secrecy, friendship, and discretion between the hands of Birinus, the Patriarch of Jerusalem. The presiding officer is called Most Equitable Sovereign Prince Master, the other officers being High Priest, 2 wardens, Keeper of the Seals and Archives, Treasurer, Master of the Ceremonies, Master of the Entrances, and Tyler. The badge is yellow bordered with red, having for its emblem a 2-edged sword. The jewel is a heptagon of silver, having at each angle a golden star. In the center is a lamb on a book with 7 seals. The reverse has a 2-edged sword between the scales of a balance. It is suspended from a blue ribbon. A somewhat more deference is paid by the Supreme Council to this degree than any which preceded. And as it is distinctly conferred by an authoritative body and forms a portion of the ceremonial of the 18th degree, it is necessary that we should give some explanation of it. The practice in conferring the degree of Rose Croix is to give first the degrees by name from the 4th to the 14th inclusive in a Grand Lodge of Perfection, then to declare a Grand Lodge of Princes of Jerusalem opened and confer the 15th and 16th degrees also by name. Having closed that, a Grand Lodge of the Knights of the East and West is opened, and that degree is given by name, accompanied by secrets and password. Thus we perceive that some importance is attached to the degree by the Supreme Council. From the following description it will be seen that were this degree practiced in accordance with the ritual, the Grand Council Chamber of the Order would have a most gorgeous appearance. It must be hung with red, spangled with golden stars. In the east, under a canopy, is placed a throne elevated on 7 steps, supported by the figures of 4 lions and 4 eagles, between which is placed an angel with 6 wings. On one side of the throne is displayed a transparency of the meridian sun, on the other of the lustrous orb of night. In the east also are 2 vases, one containing water and the other perfume. On the south and north sides are canopies for the ancients, while in the west are 2 seats with canopies raised 5 steps for the venerable wardens, who in conjunction with the most puissant act as the Grand Council. 24 knights are necessary to form a full council. On a pedestal in the east is placed a large Bible from which are suspended 7 seals. The covering of the floor displays a heptagon within a circle, over the angles of which appear certain initials. In the center is the figure of a man clothed in a white robe with a golden girdle around his waist. His right hand, which is extended, is surmounted by 7 stars. He wears a long white beard, his head is surrounded with glory, and from his mouth issues a 2-edged sword. 7 candlesticks stand around him, bearing the mysterious initials. The 7 stars by which his hand is surmounted are explained to signify the 7 qualities which ought to distinguish a Freemason, viz. Friendship, union, submission, discretion, fidelity, prudence, and temperance. But there is a higher meaning attached to the symbol of the 7 stars, derived from passages in the Old Testament. They represent the 7 eyes mentioned by Zechariah, which typify the care of divine providence, ever watchful to promote the welfare of his creatures, and the 7 lamps of the Apocalypse, which symbolize the Holy Spirit of God, whence are also derived the 7 spiritual gifts of a Christian man. The candidate, being in possession of the password of the 17th degree, then presents himself for admission to the Rose-Croix chapter. Sovereign Prince of Rose-Croix Herodom. The 18th degree is the most ancient and most generally practiced of the historical degrees of Masonry. It is found in all the principal rites, and where, like the Royal Arch, it does not exist by name, its place is supplied by others whose symbols do not differ materially from it. To those who have not gone beyond the symbolic degrees, the name is perhaps more familiarly known than any other of the higher degrees. Of its origin, nothing satisfactory is known. One writer supposes it to have been instituted by the Knights Templar in Palestine in the 12th century and asserts that Prince Edward, afterwards King Edward I, was there admitted into the order. He also says that the order was derived from an Egyptian priest converted to Christianity. Regan, in his treatise entitled Orthodoxy Maconique, has most elaborately investigated the subject and attributes its origin to a pious monk named John Valentine Andrea, who flourished in the early part of the 17th century. Andrea wrote, among other works, 2 treatises, one entitled Judicorum de Fraternitate Arsi, the other Noces Chimique de Rosenkreuz. Ragan says that Andrea grieved at seeing the principles of Christianity forgotten in idle and vain disputes, and that science was made subservient to the pride of man instead of contributing to his happiness. Passed his days in devising what he supposed to be the most appropriate means of restoring each to its legitimate moral and benevolent tendency. Clavel absurdly affirms that the degree was founded by the Jesuits for the purpose of counteracting the insidious attacks of freethinkers upon the Romish faith, but offers no evidence in support of his assertion, when in fact they were the great enemies of Masonry and, so far from supporting it, wrote treatises against the order. Many of the Rosicrucians were amongst the reformers of the age, and hence the hostility of the Romish Church. The almost universal recognition of this degree in all countries would favor the theory of its being of long standing. The ceremonies of the degree are of the most imposing and impressive character, and it is most eminently a Christian degree. Its ritual is remarkable for elegance of diction, while the symbolic teaching is not only pleasing but consistent with the Christian faith, figuratively expressing the passage of man through the valley of the shadow of death, accompanied and sustained by the Masonic virtues, faith, hope, and charity, and his final reception into the abode of light, life, and immortality. The officers of a Rose-Croix chapter are the most wise sovereign, a high prelate, the first general, the second general, who may be assimilated to wardens, a grand marshal who presents the candidates for admission, Raphael, their conductor during the ceremony, and the captain of the guard who has charge of the entrance. The candidate, previous to his admission, if he has not already done so, must sign a declaration of fealty and allegiance to the Supreme Council. And on his admission, prior to the ceremonial, he promises this more fully in the presence of the chapter. To give this degree, in the full perfection of its ceremonies, several chambers are required, and the aid of powerful and solemn music. The rooms must also be large and lofty. There are two badges worn in this degree, or rather one, which is reversible. The first may be called the badge of mourning and is of black silk, having in its center the Passion Cross. The other side is of white satin, on which the cross with roses is worked in embroidery richly ornamented. It has a rose-colored border. The collar is of rose-colored satin, richly embroidered. The jewel includes the most important symbols of the degree. It is a golden compass extended on an arc to 22.5 degrees, or the 16th part of a circle. The head of the compass is surmounted by a crown with 7 emerald points. It encloses a cross of Calvary formed of rubies or garnets, having on its center a full-blown rose, whose stem twines around the lower limb of the cross. At the foot of the cross is a pelican wounding her breast to feed her young, which are in a nest beneath. On the reverse, instead of a pelican, there is a figure of an eagle. On the arc of the circle is engraven in cipher the password of the degree. The symbols of which the jewel is composed will satisfy our readers of the Christian character of the degree. When the Rose-Croix degree is conferred, the recipient is created and constituted a Knight of the Pelican and Eagle and Prince of the Order of Rose-Croix. The degree of Knight of the Eagle and Pelican appears to be the name by which the Rose-Croix is elsewhere known, its ritual and legend being somewhat similar. But by the counsel of the ancient and accepted Rite in England and Wales, both pass as one degree. The eagle on the jewel, it is ingeniously suggested, is a symbol of Christ in his divine character, bearing the children of his adoption on his wings, teaching them with unequaled love and tenderness to spread their new-fledged wings and soar from the dull corruptions of earth to a higher and holier sphere. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verse 11, there is a beautiful comparison of the care and paternal affection of the deity for his people with the natural tenderness of the eagle for her young. As the eagle stirreth up her nest, fluttereth over her young, expandeth her plumes, taketh them, beareth them upon her wings, so Jehovah alone did lead him, and there was no strange God with him. The pelican is appropriately adopted as an emblem of the Savior who shed his blood for the salvation of the human race, from the custom attributed by the poets to this bird of tearing open its breast to feed its offspring with its own blood. Reagan says that in the hieroglyphic monuments of the ancients, the eagle was the symbol of a wise, and the pelican of a benevolent man. He therefore considers the eagle and pelican of this degree to be intended to symbolize perfect wisdom and perfect charity. The 102nd Psalm, which was written towards the end of the captivity, alludes to the lonely situation of the pelican in the wilderness, as illustrative of the poignancy of the writer's grief at witnessing the desolation of his country and the prostration of her sacred altars. In this view, the pelican is a fitting symbol for the degree. The cross was from the earliest ages, with the Egyptians, a symbol of eternal life. But since the crucifixion, it has been peculiarly adopted as an emblem of him who suffered on it. In this latter signification only it is adopted as an emblem in this degree, and hence its form. The rose in Scripture is applied as a figurative appellation of Christ. In the Canticles, he is called the Rose of Sharon. The cross alludes to his death. The rose on the cross is therefore an emblem of the death of the Savior for the sins of mankind. The rose in ancient mythology was consecrated to Harpocrates, the god of silence, and in the mysteries the Hierophant wore a crown of roses as emblems of silence and secrecy. Following this idea, Reagan suggests that as the cross was, in Egypt, an emblem of immortality and the rose of secrecy, the rose followed by the cross was the simplest mode of writing the secret of immortality. Another theory of the origin of the term assigns to the union of the rose and the cross. This explanation, that as the rose was the emblem of the female principle and the cross or triple phallus of the male, the two together, like the Indian lingam, symbolized universal generation. Without entering upon the question of the age of our institution, we may notice the undoubted fact that both the rose and the cross were used as symbols from the most remote antiquity. Whatever may have been the origin of the Rose-Croix degree, it now bears universally an entirely Christian character. It is indeed a bold attempt to Christianize Freemasonry and to apply the rites, symbols and traditions of ancient Masonry to the last and greatest dispensation. To add to the temples of Solomon and Zerubbabel a third, that to which Christ alluded when he said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Many commentators on our institution insist that all degrees of Freemasonry allude directly to the religion of Christianity. If this be granted, it may certainly be asserted that the light on the subject becomes clearer in each succeeding degree and displays its full effulgence in the exquisite mysteries of the Rose-Croix. Jehovah says, "I am come down to deliver my people." He is said to come down in the person of Jesus Christ. In this degree, the divine glory is symbolically asserted to have been manifested at the period when the Word was recovered, the cubical stone being changed into the mystical rose, attended with the appearance of a blazing star, dispelling darkness, restoring the true light, and making the new law visible in our works. The brother who is admitted to the Rose-Croix will observe that the great discovery made in the early degrees of Masonry ceases to be of any value in this degree, for the wisdom, strength and beauty which supported the Temple of Solomon are replaced by the Christian pillars of faith, hope and charity. The 3 great lights of the Royal Arch of course remain, but the 3 lesser give place to 30 others, which, added to the 3 greater lights, allude to the years of the Messiah's sojourn upon earth. In short, from beginning to end, everything bears the impress of Christianity. At its meetings, the brethren break bread and eat salt with one another, and on the goblet of fraternal affection invoke the blessing of Him who is the Rose of Sharon, to aid on earth their progress to that state of perfection which will enable them, when bursting from the tomb, to join their great Emmanuel in the skies and be there united in a happy eternity. Music lends its assistance to give this degree a character of sublimity, and at the closing of a chapter, after Gloria in Excelsis Deo, this anthem is sung. Grateful notes and numbers bring, while the name of God we sing. Holy, holy, holy Lord, be thy glorious name adored. Men on earth and saints above sing the great Redeemer's love. Lord, thy mercies never fail. Hail, hail, celestial goodness, hail. While on earth ordained to stay, guide our footsteps in thy way. Mortals, raise your voices high till they reach the echoing sky. Men on earth and saints above sing the great Redeemer's love. Lord, thy mercies never fail. Hail, hail, celestial goodness, hail. In concluding our remarks on this impressive ceremony, we feel bound to say that if Christian Freemasonry, as with the ancient brotherhoods, is to be admitted, then certainly the Rose-Croix is a most beautiful rite. Conducted as we have witnessed it in the Metropolitan and other chapters, it cannot fail to impress every brother with its sublimity and beauty. To this degree has been attached the significant designation of Ne Plus Ultra. In the original form of the Order of Knights Templar in this country, it was the next step taken above the simple Templar degree and was followed by that of the Kadosh. All encampments being qualified to give those degrees, the emblems of all are engraved on the certificates issued prior to 1851, and the seal confirms the grant. The Ne Plus Ultra is at the top of the Masonic ladder, the KDSH, uniting the whole structure. But at the present day, so desirous is the Supreme Council to disavow the Knights Templar that the candidate for the Rose-Croix is, at the time of receiving the degree, allowed to wear the jewels of any Masonic rank he may have attained, except that of the Knight Templar. The Rose-Croix degree possesses similar characteristics to the Templar. The object in both degrees is the same, the Templar perhaps confining itself more to fact, while the Rose-Croix displays more of the allegory. Hence in the latter was afforded a better opportunity of interweaving the symbols of craft masonry with an emblem of the Christian faith. The older Masons are united in the opinion that these degrees ought never to have been separated. The high consideration in which the Rose-Croix is held is shown in the circumstance that its ritual has met with universal acceptance. The symbolic degrees are in all countries identical, so also is the Rose-Croix. And this cannot be said of any other degree. We can nowhere find a satisfactory explanation of the word Herodom. Reagan, in the second edition of his Orthodoxie Maconique, says it was invented by the Stuart party and is a corruption of the medieval Latin word heredum, which signified a piece of ground fallen by inheritance. Mackay observes that, in an old manuscript of the Scotch Rites, he has discovered the following explanation, that Herodon is the name of a mountain situate in the northwest of Scotland, where the first or metropolitan lodge of Europe was held, and supposes that the present orthography may be the French mode of spelling it. Dr. Oliver calls the Herodom and Rosy Cross in the Royal Order of Scotland. 2 degrees, he states that the Royal Order of Herodom was founded on the dissolution of the Order of the Knights Templar in the year 1314, and that the Rose Croix was, by the Grand Chapter of the former degree, added in 1736. In Scotland, the Rose Croix degree is given under the right of the Royal Order of Herodom and Rosy Cross, as well as under the sanction of the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree. To be eligible for this order, the brother must be acknowledged as a Royal Archmason by the Grand Chapter of Scotland. In connection with this degree, it may be observed that the initials of the Latin inscription placed on the cross, INRI, representing Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum, were by the Rosicrucians used as the initials of one of their hermetic secrets, Igne Natura Renovatur Integra. By fire, nature is perfectly renewed. They also adopted them to express the names of their 3 elementary principles, salt, sulfur, and mercury, by making them the initials of the sentence Igna Nitrum Roris Invenitur. A learned Mason finds in the equivalent Hebrew letters the initials of the Hebrew names of the ancient elements Jaminim, water, Nur, fire, Ruach, air, and Yebsha, earth. In the first part of the ceremony, on the floor is a painting representing 7 circles in white on a black ground, and in the center a pelican, the circles representing the 7 periods of the world's existence, through which the aspirant for honors has to pass. This symbol is doubtless of long date, for we learn from a traveler in the island of Ceylon that in the ancient city of Anuradhapura, there is in the sacred enclosure of a Dagobah or temple a circular slab of dark bluish granite, and on it are sculptured 7 concentric rings. Within each of these are different sacred emblems, and in the 7th, or inner, are a cow, a lion, a horse, and an elephant, also a peculiar long narrow leaf. The center is occupied by which forms the letter Y of the Lath alphabet. The antiquity of this degree is shown in Rossetti's work on the secret societies which preceded the Reformation, especially in the extract which follows. St. Paul, in the book of Galatians, chapter 2, calls the 3 apostles who attended their divine master in his most divine moments and who witnessed his transfiguration on Mount Tabor and his devotion in the garden, pillars, and following that passage of the apostle, the Paulicians made them 3 pillars, emblematic of the 3 theological virtues. St. Peter was faith, St. James hope, and St. John charity. In a rite which is supposed to have descended from the Albigenses, 3 pillars appear with the names of those virtues on them. The candidate is obliged to travel for 33 years, thus they call the 33 turns he takes in allusion to the age of our Lord, to learn the beauties of the new law. His leader takes round the 3 columns, repeating successively the name of each virtue, and afterwards asks him what he has learnt in his pilgrimage, to which he answers that he has learnt the 3 virtues of faith, hope, and charity, and that by them he intends to govern himself. The master assures him that they are the principles and pillars of the new mystery. In these same rites of the pilgrimage undertaken by the candidate who is 33 years of age, which extends through 33 years, the tragedy of Good Friday and the events of the following days are rehearsed, and Christ dies and rises again under his eyes. This new mystery or new law is the essence of Dante's Vita Nuova. In the Paradise we find this rite described exactly. Before the last vision, St. Peter examines him on faith, St. James on hope, and St. John on charity, relating to the 3 pilgrimages, of the Palmers or Templars to St. John of Jerusalem, of the Pilgrims or Albigenses to St. James in Galicia, and of the Romae or Ghibellines to St. Peter's in Rome. And at the examination presides Beatrice, who by a far-fetched comparison is likened to Christ when transfigured before the eyes of his 3 apostles. Wishing to let us know that these things are all mystical, he says in the Convito, There is one thing which should be very attentively observed by readers for their own and their pupils' benefit. We read that when Christ went up into the mount to be transfigured, he took only 3 apostles with him out of the 12, and by that we are to understand that in very secret things we should have but few companions. Rossetti. The Rose-Croix degree is alluded to in the works of Henry Cornelius Agrippa, a man of great learning and talent, of a noble family at Cologne, born 1486. His works were printed at Leyden in 1550. He practiced as a physician and astrologer, and by the ignorance of the age was considered to be addicted to magical arts. He visited England in 1510. Amongst the earliest known to have belonged to the Rose-Croix Brotherhood was John Gower, the friend of Chaucer, whose sumptuous monument in St. Mary Overy's Church, or as it is now called St. Saviour's, Southwark, shows the recognition of the degree in the purple and gold band with fillets of roses which encircles his head. In Gower's works also the degree may be traced. The initiated in the Rose-Croix degree will, by careful study, find allusions to it in the poems of Chaucer. St. Saviour's Church is perhaps one of the least known in the great metropolis. It is well deserving of a visit. England does not contain a more elegant Gothic structure, and there are many memorials of interest to Masons. An effigy of a cross-legged Knight Templar, the stone effigy of an emaciated man wrapped in a shroud, which is drawn up in a very curious manner at the back of the head into a projecting knot. In the window of the south transept is, in beautiful stone tracery, the double triangle, and now placed upon the organ are the shields of Templars. The Rose-Croix chapters in England. Metropolitan chapter held at Freemasons Hall, London. Corriton chapter at Axminster, Devon. All Souls chapter at Weymouth. Mount Calvary chapter at the Ship and Turtle, Leadenhall Street, London. Vernon chapter, Dee's Hotel, Birmingham. St. Peter and St. Paul at Bath. Palestine chapter held alternately at Bolton, Liverpool and Manchester. Royal Kent chapter, Newcastle upon Tyne. Vectis chapter, Masonic Hall, Ride, Isle of Wight. Royal Naval chapter, Portsmouth. Invicta chapter, Masonic Hall, Woolwich. Grand Pontiff is the denomination of the 19th degree, and an appellation more decidedly papal could scarcely be found. Except in this and some other Masonic degrees, the modern title of Pontiff would appear to be applied exclusively to the head of the Romish Church. Yet it can be undoubtedly traced to the early days of ancient Rome, when Numa Pompilius, 710 to 672 before Christ, founded the College of Priests and instituted the office of Pontifex Maximus. The pontiff stood in the place of an ecclesiastical court at Rome, having superintendence and power over all persons in matters connected with religion and ceremonial laws, and amongst their numerous duties was the government of the Vestal Virgins and the superintendence of their moral conduct. The brethren who reached this Masonic degree, however, are not, as we are advised, possessed of any of these extraordinary powers, but are occupied in an examination of the apocalyptic mysteries of the New Jerusalem, as set forth in the book of Revelation, chapter 21 and 22. There are 2 chief officers, a thrice puissant in the east, who is seated on a throne under a canopy of blue, wearing a white satin robe, and the warden in the west, who bears a staff of gold. All the members are clothed in white and wear blue fillets embroidered with 12 golden stars. The decorations or hangings of the lodge represent the vault of heaven, celestial blue with stars of gold. The sash is crimson with golden stars. To it is suspended the jewel, a square, on one side of which is Alpha and on the other Omega. Grand Master ad vitam, or Grand Master of all the symbolic lodges, is the imposing name bestowed on the 20th degree. Here the brother is again led to temple building. The historical lecture refers to the period of the destruction of the third temple by Titus in the year 70. The Christian Freemasons then in the Holy Land, filled with sorrow, departed from their home with the determination of erecting a 4th temple, a spiritual edifice, and dividing themselves into different lodges dispersed over the various countries in Europe. A considerable number went to Scotland and made choice of the town of Kilwinning, where they established a lodge and built an abbey, in which the records of the order were deposited. We are not informed where these worthy brethren were traveling during the period between the years 70 and 1140, when this magnificent abbey was founded, in which we have tolerably good proof that a Masonic lodge was founded by the builders engaged in constructing the edifice. The presiding officer is styled Venerable Grand Master and represents Cyrus Artaxerxes. Who is the personage meant, we are at a loss to imagine. The younger Cyrus was the younger brother of Artaxerxes, second king of Persia of that name, and died in his 24th year, 368 before Christ. Taylor says, on the suggestion of Prideaux, that the period of Artaxerxes Longimanus, who died 368 before Christ, corresponds with the Ahasuerus of Scripture mentioned in the book of Esther, whose wife was the daughter of Cyrus I. This is one of those numerous instances of anachronism in dates and persons that occur in the traditional history of the symbolic and historical degrees and annoy the inquirer in his researches. They have arisen through the superficial acquaintance the framers had with ancient history and could easily be set right. The names of Cyrus and Artaxerxes did not belong to the same individual. The lodge, when perfect, is composed of 9 Grand Masters. They all wear collars of yellow and blue. The jewel is a triangle on which is engraved initials of the words Noachite, or Prussian Knight, or the very ancient order of Noachites is the 21st degree. We now find the traditional history carried back to an earlier date than in any other degree in Masonry, either symbolical or historical, for it commemorates the destruction of the Tower of Babel. It is stated that the meetings in this degree are holden only on the night of the full moon, and that no other light is permitted than what is derived from that luminary. The meeting is called a chapter, and it is presided over by a knight commander-lieutenant who represents Frederick II, King of Prussia. The other officers of the degree are 5 knights, the first being called Knight of Introduction, the second of Eloquence, the third of Finances, the fourth of Chancery, and the fifth of Defense. The badge is white satin with a yellow border. The knights wear a black sash from right to left, and on the front is the jewel, an equilateral triangle crossed by an arrow. The Noachites profess to be descendants of Peleg, who they say was the chief architect of the tower, whose top was to reach to heaven. This is a gratuitous assumption, for all that Moses tells us is that his father named him Peleg, division, for or because in his days the earth was divided. This order of the Noachites was first established in Prussia in 1755. There must have been formerly in English Masonry some matters connecting the name of the survivor of the deluge with its traditional history. Probably the Ark and Mark and Ark and Dove degrees were then used. For we find in Ahiman Rezin, published in 1764 by Lawrence Dermot, the first of the old charges, which is as follows. Concerning God and religion, a Mason is obliged by his tenure to observe the moral law as a true Noachida, son of Noah, the first name of Freemasons. And if he rightly understand the craft, he never will be a stupid atheist, nor an irreligious libertine, nor act against conscience. In ancient times, the Christian Masons were charged to comply with the Christian usages of each country where they traveled or worked. Being found in all nations, even of diverse religions, they are generally charged to adhere to that religion in which all men agree, leaving each brother to his own particular opinion. That is, to be good men and true men of honor and honesty, by whatever names, religions, or persuasions they may be distinguished. For they all agree in the 3 great articles of Noah, enough to preserve the cement of the lodge. Thus, Masonry is the center of their union and the happy means of conciliating persons that otherwise must have remained at a perpetual distance. It is to be observed that in the genealogical table of Jesus Christ, as given by St. Luke, Phaleg is called Phallic. There may be some further reference to him on that account in the historical traditions of the degree. Our ancient brethren evidently called themselves Noachidai, or sons of Noah, and his precepts were preserved among them, the 3 first of which are 1. Renounce all idols. 2. Worship the only true God. 3. Commit no murder. On this head, Brother Oliver says, the spurious Masons of antiquity in all their mysteries commemorated the descent of Noah into the ark and his subsequent exodus. The entrance into initiation was symbolic of his entrance into the vessel of his salvation. His detention in the ark was represented by the darkness and the pastos, coffers or couch, in which the aspirant was placed. And the exit of Noah after the 40 days of deluge was seen in the manifestation of the candidate when, being fully tried and proved, he was admitted to full light amid the surrounding initiates who received him in the Sacellum or holy place. It is not improbable that the ancient Masons, real or spurious, derived the connection of our father Noah from the Egyptian mysteries, as according to Bishop Cumberland, Mizraim, the son of Cham, grandson of Noah, was the first king of Egypt, and the name Osiris was his appropriated title, signifying prince. Prince of Lebanon or Knight of the Royal Axe. The 22nd degree, Thory asserts, was instituted by Pierre Riel, Marquis of Bournonville, who, when in command of the island of Bourbon in 1778, was their elected Grand Master of all the French lodges in India. The legend of this degree states that it was instituted to record the memorable services rendered to Masonry by the mighty cedars of Lebanon, as the Sidonian architects cut down the cedars for the construction of Noah's Ark. Our ancient brethren indeed do not tell us how the Israelites had the wood conveyed to them from the land of promise to the mountains in the wilderness. They further say that the descendants of the Sidonians were employed in the same offices and in the same place in obtaining materials for the construction of the Ark of the Covenant, and also in later years for building Solomon's temple. And lastly, that Zerubbabel employed laborers of the same people in cutting cedars of Lebanon for the use of the second temple. The tradition adds that the Sidonians formed colleges on Mount Libanus and always adored the Gaotu. Sidon was one of the most ancient cities of the world, and even in the time of Homer, the Sidonians were celebrated for their trade and commerce, their wealth and prosperity. But their worship was not that of the true and living God, for medals are in existence bearing the inscription to the Sidonian goddess. And this agrees with the appellation in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 11, Ashtoreth, goddess of the Sidonians. The allusion to the colleges on Mount Libanus may have some reference to the secret sect of the Druses, who still exist in that country, and whose mysterious ceremonies, travelers affirm, have considerable affinity to Freemasonry. There are 2 apartments. The first representing a workshop at Lebanon, with axes, saws, mallets, wedges, and such like implements. The master is most wise, his wardens wise princes. This apartment is lighted by 11 lamps, and this assembly is a college. Each brother is armed with an axe. The second apartment represents the Council of the Round Table. The presiding officer is Grand Patriarch, the others patriarchs. The room is hung with red. A round table in the center has on it the square, compass, and other mathematical instruments. Each patriarch is armed with a sword. The collar belonging to this degree is celestial blue, lined and bordered with stars. The badge, which is white, has on it represented a table upon which are laid several architectural plans. The jewel is an axe crowned in gold. Chief of the Tabernacle. The 23rd degree commemorates the institution of the order of priesthood in Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, and the ceremonial was in some degree founded on the instruction delivered to Moses in the book of Exodus, chapter 29 and 40. In many rites, the degree of high priest is to be found. In the old ritual of the Holy Royal Arch, the high priest was the chief officer, and we still retain in that portion of English Masonry, as well as in the Master Mason's degree, reference to him who only had the privilege of entering the sanctuary once in the year on the day of solemn expiation to make atonement for the sins of the whole people. So that doubtless this was a genuine Masonic degree and not unworthy of practice at the present day. The installation of the third principle of a Royal Arch chapter has undoubtedly been derived from this or some similar ceremonial. In the United States, the order of High Priest, conferred on the immediate past first principle, somewhat resembles that of past master of a lodge. The ceremony, when duly performed, is exceedingly impressive. When celebrated in ample form, the presence of at least 9 high priests is required. In America, as was formerly the case in England, high priest is the title given to the first principal. In this degree, there are 3 chief officers, viz. a sovereign grand sacrificer and 2 high priests, and the members are called Levites. They wear a white badge lined with scarlet and bordered with a tricolored ribbon, red, purple, and blue. In the center is embroidered a representation of the candlestick of pure gold, with 3 branches on the one side and 3 branches on the other side, and on the flap, a violet-colored myrtle. The jewel, which is a thurible or censer, is suspended from a broad sash of 4 colors, yellow, purple, blue, and scarlet, and worn from the left shoulder to the right hip. The lodge is hung with white, ornamented with columns of red and black, ranged in pairs at equal distances. The holy place is separated by a railing and curtain. There is a red altar, on it the Book of Wisdom and a poniard. The throne is elevated on 7 steps. There is the altar of burnt offering and the incense, also 2 chandeliers of 5 lights each. There is the obscure chamber, which is hung with black. It has 1 lamp, an altar, and a stool on which are 3 skulls, also a skeleton with this inscription: "If you are fearful, go from hence. It is not permitted for men who cannot brave danger without abandoning virtue." The grand sacrificer wears a long red robe over a yellow tunic, which is without sleeves. On his head is a mitre of cloth of gold. He wears a black scarf with silver fringe. The Levites wear white robes with red scarfs. In the prophecy of Zechariah, there is an account of the splendid and significant emblem used in this degree, presented in a vision which will abundantly reward an attentive examination. The principal object that met the eyes of the prophet was a candlestick all of gold, with a bowl on the top of it and 7 lamps. The image is evidently taken from the candlestick in the tabernacle. This candlestick is the scriptural symbol of the universal church. Prince of the Tabernacle. The name which is given to the 24th degree is intended to illustrate the directions for constructing the tabernacle which Moses built for God by his express command, partly to be a palace of his presence as the King of Israel, and partly to be the locality of that most solemn worship which the people were to pay to him. This was a movable chapel, if we may so call it, so contrived as to be taken to pieces and put together at pleasure, for the convenience of carrying it from place to place during the wanderings of the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years. This movable fabric, which may properly be called the sacred tent, was nevertheless built with extraordinary magnificence and at a prodigious expense, that it might be in some measure suitable to the dignity of the king whose palace it was, and to the value of those spiritual and eternal blessings of which it was designed as a type or emblem. The value of the gold and silver alone used for the work amounted, according to Bishop Cumberland's estimate, in English money, to £182,628. The immense sum required for its completion was raised by presents and voluntary contributions, and by a poll tax of half a shekel for every male Israelite above 20 years old, which tax amounted to the sum of £35,359, 7 shillings and 6 sterling. The lodge is called a hierarchy, and its officers are a most powerful chief prince, representing Moses, and 3 wardens whose style is powerful and who respectively represent Aaron, Bezalel, and Aholiab. There are 2 apartments necessary for this degree. The first, or vestibule, is decorated with the various attributes of masonry. The second, which is of circular form, is hung with tapestry, representing a colonnade. The sun is represented on the mosaic pavement, and in the center is the chandelier with 7 branches. The members wear short cloaks of blue taffeta edged with gold embroidery and a robe of cloth of gold. They have a coronet environed by stars and surmounted by a luminous triangle. The badge is white, lined with scarlet and bordered with green. In the center is embroidered a representation of the tabernacle. The flap is sky blue. The 23rd and 24th degrees, it will be seen, have been based upon the official duties of the priests. In the former we find the ark, altar and golden candlestick. The wardens are styled high priests, while the presiding officer has the title of Grand Sovereign Sacrificer. The assembly is termed a hierarchy. In the latter degree, there are 3 wardens, placed in the southwest and north. The officers represent Moses, the lawgiver, Aaron, the high priest, Bezaleel and Aholiab, the cunning artists under whose direction the tabernacle was constructed. The candidate represents Eleazar, who succeeded Aaron in the priesthood. The brother who is admitted to the degree of high priesthood is thus addressed. The station you are called upon to fulfill is important not only as it respects the correct practice of our rites and ceremonies and the internal economy of the chapter over which you are called upon to preside, but the public reputation of the institution will generally be found to rise or fall according to the skill, fidelity and discretion with which its concerns are managed, and in proportion as the conduct and character of its principal officers are estimable or censurable. In the first degree of Scotch knighthood, the adept is informed that he has been elevated to the degree of high priest, which entitles him to receive the following information: that in future he has to adore the deity under the name of Jehovah, which is much more expressive than the word Adonai; that in this degree he receives the Masonic science as descended from Solomon and revived by the Templars. In the second degree, the royal art is traced to the creation, from which period it has been transmitted through Noah, Abraham, Moses, Solomon and other worthies, down to Hugo de Payan, the founder of the Knights Templar, and Jacques de Molay, their last Grand Master. In the next degree, the great word is revealed to him, discovered by the Knights Templar when building a church at Jerusalem. It is related that in digging under the spot whereon had been placed the Holy of Holies, in the bosom of Mount Moriah, they discovered 3 stones, on one of which was this word engraven. The Templars, on leaving the Holy Land, carried with them these relics, and on their arrival in Scotland, deposited them on St. Andrew's Day as the foundation stones of their first lodge, whence they assumed the name of Knights of St. Andrew. The tradition adds that their successors, being entrusted with this secret, are perfect masters of Freemasonry at the present day and high priests of Jehovah. Our royal arch-brethren will readily trace in this legend a resemblance to certain parts of the ceremonial belonging to that supreme degree, and in reference to the place in which the discovery was made, it is to be observed that Josephus speaks of some vaulted chambers that existed on the holy spot in his time. The old traveller Maundrell also says that in a garden situate at the foot of Mount Moriah, he was shown several large vaults running at least 50 yards underground. They were built in 2 aisles arched at the top with a huge firm stone and sustained by 2 pillars, each consisting of a single stone 2 yards in diameter. Knight of the Brazen Serpent, the 25th degree, is of long standing and founded upon the events described in the Book of Numbers, chapter 21, verses 6 through 9. And the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against thee. Pray unto the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. And Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said unto Moses, Make thee a fiery serpent, and set it upon a pole. And it shall come to pass that every one that is bitten when he looketh upon it shall live. And Moses made a serpent of brass, and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. The ritual says that Moses, in obedience to the divine command, placed the brazen serpent upon the tow, and everyone who looked upon it was directed to pronounce the word Hatath, I have sinned, and having done this, he was immediately healed. Commentators regard the word, rendered pole in our translation, to mean standard, and the earliest form of the standard of which we have a representation, the Persian, is the figure of the tow. The hangings of the lodge are red and blue, a transparency representing the burning bush with the incommunicable name in the center is placed over the throne. There is only one light. In the center of the apartment there is a mount accessible by 5 steps. Upon the summit is placed the symbol of the degree. The lodge is named the Court of Sinai. The presiding officer is styled Most Powerful Grand Master and represents Moses. The wardens are called ministers and represent Aaron and Joshua. The orator is styled Pontiff, the secretary Grand Graver, and the candidate a traveler. The jewel, which is suspended by a red ribbon, is a serpent entwined around a tow cross standing on a triangle with the inscription. The legend states that this degree was founded in the time of the Crusades. by John Ralph, who established it in the Holy Land as a military and monastic order and gave it the name it bears, in allusion to the healing and saving virtues of the brazen serpent among the Israelites in the wilderness, it being part of the obligation of the knights to receive and gratuitously nurse sick travelers, protect them against the attacks of the infidels, and escort them safely through Palestine. The brazen serpent which Moses set up was preserved as a memorial of this miracle till the time of Hezekiah, more than 700 years, who, in extirpating idolatry, removed the high places and brake the images and cut down the groves and brake in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For until those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it. This was a bold measure, for some kings, however bent on the extirpation of idolatry, would have hesitated at the destruction of that which was certainly in itself an interesting memorial of a remarkable manifestation of the power of God. It is not improbable that the influence of the example of the Egyptians, combined with the remembrance of the benefits derived from this particular brazen serpent, induced the Israelites to adopt the practice of serpent worship. In the wilderness, their fathers had been directed to look on it and live. They did so and lived. And this direction and its consequence, misunderstood and perverted, may have formed the foundation of the idolatry into which they fell. In what manner they worshipped the serpent does not appear, but it is most probable that with a recollection of its origin they regarded it as symbolizing the divine healing power, and as such burned incense before it when attacked with disease, much in the same manner as the classical ancients resorted on similar occasions to the serpent symbol of the healing god. The worship of the serpent is supposed by Bryant to have commenced in Chaldea, and to have been the first variation from the purer Zabaism. That it was intimately connected with Zabaism cannot be doubted, for the most prevailing emblem of the solar god was the serpent, and wherever the Zabaean idolatry was the religion, the serpent was the sacred symbol. But the universality of serpent worship and the strong traces which it has left in astronomical mythology seem to attest an origin coeval with Zabaism itself. The earliest authentic record of serpent worship is to be found in the astronomy of Chaldea and China, but the extensive diffusion of this remarkable superstition through the remaining regions of the globe, where Chinese wisdom never penetrated and Chaldean philosophy was but feebly reflected, authorizes the inference that neither China nor Chaldea was the mother, but that both were the children of this idolatry. Few ancient nations of any celebrity will be found which have not, at some time or other, admitted the serpent into their religion, either as a symbol of divinity or a charm or an oracle or a god. The universality of serpent worship is alluded to by Lucan in these memorable lines: Vos quoque, qui cunctis in oxia, numina terris serpetis, orato nitidi fulgore dracones. Diodorus informs us that in the temple of Bel or Belus in Babylon was an image of the goddess Rhea, sitting on a golden throne. At her knees stood 2 lions, and near her very large serpents of silver, 30 talents each in weight. There was also an image of Juno, holding in her right hand the head of a serpent. Herodotus says, in the vicinity of Thebes there are sacred serpents, not at all troublesome to men. They are very small, but have 2 horns on the top of their head. When they die, they are buried in the temple of Jupiter, to whom they are said to belong. In his notice of the Egyptian mythology, Bryant says the symbolical worship of the serpent was in the first ages very extensive and was introduced into all the mysteries wherever celebrated. It is remarkable that wherever the Ammonians founded any places of worship, there was generally some story of a serpent. Serpent worship, under some form or other, was one of the most widely diffused modes of idolatry of the ancient world. It was the deified symbol of something good and beneficent. Among the Greeks and Romans, it symbolized the good genius, and their worship of the healing power, the god Aesculapius, under the same figure, was but an extension of the same general idea. In various points of view, Aesculapius corresponds to the Egyptian deities Serapis and Horus. In the monuments upon which these divinities are figured, they bear serpents as the emblems of health, and carry the chalice or salutary cup of nature surrounded by serpents. There was a remarkable superstition in regard to a serpent of enormous bulk, which girded the world, current in the mythology of almost every nation where ophiolatry prevailed. This idea perhaps originated in the early consecration of the serpent to the sun, and the subsequent conversion of a serpent biting his tail into an emblem of the sun's path. This hierogram was again considered as typical of eternity, partly from the serpent being a symbol of deity, partly from the perfect figure of a circle thus formed without beginning or end, and partly from an opinion of the eternity of matter. Remains of this superstition were observed by Bishop Pocock when he visited the banks of the Nile. The next day we came to Rite, where the religious sheikh of the famous serpent Herod was at the side of the river to meet us. He went with us to the grotto of the serpent. He said it had been there ever since the time of Mahomet. He comes out of the grotto only during the 4 summer months, and it is said they sacrificed to it. In the ancient Persian mysteries, the statue of Mithra stood erect on a globe out of which issued a serpent, the emblem of life, which, twining in numerous folds around the body of the deity, marked the convolutions of his orb and the cycles of revolving time. When the honors of initiation were conferred on the candidate, a golden serpent was placed in his bosom as an emblem of his being regenerated and made a disciple of Mithra. For this animal, renewing its vigor in the spring of every year by casting its skin, was not only considered as an apt symbol of renovated and reviviscent virtue, but of the sun himself, whose genial heat is annually renewed when he revisits the vernal signs. The Prince of Mercy, or Scotch Trinitarian, is the name given to the 26th degree, which of course clearly designates its character and intention. It is a highly philosophical degree and its ritual very impressive. The assembly is styled the Thrice Heavenly Lodge. The chief prince, whose title is Most Excellent, represents Moses. The senior warden represents Aaron, the junior Eleazar, and the candidate Joshua. The jewel is a gold equilateral triangle within which is a heart, also of gold, inscribed with the Hebrew letter, one of the symbols of the Tetragrammaton. It is suspended from a tricolored ribbon of green, white, and red. The apron is red, bordered with white fringe, and has a blue flap. On the flap is embroidered the jewel. This is a Christian degree, and its ritual speaks of the triple alliance which the Eternal has made with man, and alludes in the first place to the covenant entered into with Abraham by circumcision. Secondly, to that with his people in the wilderness through Moses. And thirdly, to that which he made with mankind by the mediation of his Son Jesus Christ. With regard to the word covenant, we may notice that Mr. Taylor, in his edition of Calmet's dictionary, says, the word testamentum is often used in Latin to express the Hebrew berith, which signifies covenant, whence the titles Old and New Testament are used improperly to denote the Old and New Covenant. Without discussing the doctrine advanced in the ritual of this degree, we may remark that the first covenant between God and man was made with Adam at his creation, when he was prohibited to eat a certain fruit. A second covenant God made with man after his fall, promising not only forgiveness on his repentance, but also a Messiah who should redeem the human race from the death of sin and from the second death. A third covenant was with Noah when the Lord directed him to build the ark, and which was renewed. These covenants were general, but that made with Abraham was limited. The seal or confirmation was the circumcision of all the males in Abraham's family. The effects of this covenant appear throughout the Old Testament. The coming of the Messiah is the consummation and end of it. The covenant of God with Adam forms what we call a state of nature. That with Abraham, explained further under Moses, constitutes the law. That ratified through the mediation of Jesus Christ is the kingdom of grace. In common discourse, we usually say the Old and New Testaments, the covenant between God and the posterity of Abraham, and that which he has made with believers by Jesus Christ, because these two covenants contain eminently all the rest. The most solemn and perfect of the covenants of God with men is that made through the mediation of our Redeemer, which must subsist to the end of time. The Son of God is the guarantee of it. It is confirmed with his blood. The end and object of it is eternal life, and its constitution and laws are infinitely more exalted than those of the former covenant. Grand Commander of the Temple is the 27th degree. The assemblage is called a court, And altogether the degree has a character dissimilar to every other that precedes it. Everything about it is of the chivalric and military class. The presiding officer is styled most puissant. The wardens are sovereign grand commanders, and even the knights are designated commanders. The chamber is hung with red, having black columns surmounted by torches. On an altar is placed the Book of the Evangelists, with a scepter and naked sword. On a pedestal is placed a lustre bearing 27 lights. The members ought to be placed in a circle, and if there is no reception, at a round table. The badge is red satin, lined and edged with black, with a Teutonic cross encircled by a wreath of laurel and a key beneath, all embroidered in black upon the flap. The scarf is white, bordered with red, hanging from the right shoulder to the left hip, and bears on it a Teutonic cross in red. The jewel is a golden triangle on which is engraved the ineffable name in Hebrew. It is suspended from a white collar bound with red and embroidered with 4 Teutonic crosses. The accounts we have from the French writers all concur in connecting this degree with the Knights Templar, and it certainly has much of the character of that order. It is generally considered to have been intended to supply the Templar degree under this rite, but as we shall enter fully into the subject under its proper head, as a distinct rite, it is not necessary to say more in this place. Knight of the Sun is the designation of the 28th degree. It is highly philosophical. It also bears other names, being sometimes called Prince of the Sun, Prince Adept, and Key of Masonry, or Chaos Disentangled. Reagan, who in his Cours Philosophique speaks disparagingly of the high degrees, says this is not a modern invention but is of the highest antiquity and was in fact the last degree of perfect initiation, teaching as it did the doctrines of natural religion, which formed an essential part of the ancient mysteries. The ceremonies and lecture, which are of great length, furnish a history of all the preceding degrees and explain in the fullest manner the various Masonic emblems. The great object of this degree is the inculcation of truth, and as this virtue is one of the 3 great tenets of Masonry, we need scarcely say it deserves commendation. To be true and trusty is one of the first lessons in which the aspirant is instructed. It is the prime essential of the master. All mortal affairs are transitory, but truth alone is immutable and eternal. It is the attribute of Him in whom there is no variableness, nor shadow of changing. This might with propriety be called the degree of perfection, for truth, like a substance or reality, is opposed to typical representations, which are but as shadows. The law was given by Moses, but the grace and truth, the reality of the promised blessings, came by Jesus Christ. Every man should speak truth to his neighbor, that is, honestly, sincerely, with integrity. Truth on the part of God is united with mercy and goodness, because fidelity to promises being one great test of truth, and goodness and mercy being implied in the divine promises. When God realized any special good, He did but show Himself faithful and true, fulfilling the desires or acting for the advantage of those who confided in Him and in His word. The love of truth is one of the noblest characteristics of the Christian or truly pious man of any creed, and as genuine piety, wherever it prevails, will banish falsehood. So we find a real love of truth and the conformity of a man's conduct with the regulations of truth to be always the most desirable, the most favorable, the most decisive proofs of genuine religion, which, being itself a system of truth, delights in nothing more than in truth, whether of heart, discourse, or conduct. The principal officers of this degree are styled Thrice Perfect Father Adam and Brother Truth. There are 7 subordinate officers who are named after the 7 chief angels: Zaphiel, Camael, Anael, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Zaphriel. 4 apartments are requisite for the due ceremonial of this degree. The first represents a grotto. In the center is a column to which is attached a chain. On one side is a table having on it a Bible and a small lamp. Over the entrance to the next apartment is inscribed, "Ye who have not power to subdue your passions, flee this sanctuary." This chamber is hung with black and lighted by 3 candles in the east, west, and south. The 4th chamber is hung with red and is illuminated by 11 candles. The last chamber is azure blue and has but one light, which is very powerful, being a large illuminated glass globe representing the sun, the symbol of the great All, from whom flow all philosophical principles. The collar is white, having on it a chain suspending the jewel, a triangle of gold with an eye in the center. The master wears a red robe and yellow tunic. He has a scepter with golden globe on the top. The historical legend describes the 7 cherubim whose names are written in the circle of the first heaven, to represent the corporeal pleasures of this life which the Eternal presented to man at the creation, when he taught him to enjoy and to obey. These are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, tranquility and thought. In the Holy Scriptures, we frequently read of missions and appearances of angels sent to declare the will of God, to correct, teach, reprove, or comfort. Reference to these angelic missions is made in this degree, and we will describe those to which the allusion applies. In the apocryphal book of Tobit, Raphael tells Tobias that he is one of the 7 angels who attend in the presence of God. The Holy St. John saw 7 angels standing before the Lord, as mentioned in the book of Revelation, chapter 8, verse 2. And in that sublime and mysterious book, the Apocalypse, we find the number 7 ever prominent. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks are the 7 churches. The number 7 among all nations has been considered as a sacred number, and in every system of antiquity we find a frequent reference to it. In one of the lectures of the high degrees, it is stated that the different Masonic grades originally were 7 in number, from the example of the GAOTU, who created all things in 6 days and rested on the 7th. Enoch, it is said, employed 6 days in constructing the arches, and on the 7th, having deposited the secret treasure in the lowest arch, was translated to the abode of the blessed. Solomon, who had been employed somewhat more than 6 years in building the temple, celebrated its dedication in the 7th with every solemnity that was due to the divine being in whose honor it had been erected. The Pythagoreans called this a venerable number because it referred to the creation, and because it made up the 2 perfect figures, the triangle and the square. The radical meaning of Sheba is sufficiency or fullness, and the number 7 was thus denominated because it was on the 7th day that God completed his work of creation. And hence, says Parkhurst, 7 was, both among believers and heathens, the number of sufficiency or completion. In Freemasonry, 7 is an essential and important number, and throughout the whole system, the septenary influence extends itself in 1,000 different ways. This degree, as already mentioned, was worked by the Kent Lodge. We think it very probable that it was some knowledge of this degree which induced Rossetti to connect the theology of Swedenborg with Freemasonry. The degree is noticed by him in illustration of the Purgatory of Dante. It was formerly an extensive practice and one of those preserved by the ancient Masons in England, as already mentioned. Knight of St. Andrew, the 29th degree, is the preparation for the Kadosh. This degree has also been called Patriarch of the Crusades, in allusion to its supposed origin during those wars, and it had also the name of Grand Master of Light. There are a master and 2 wardens. The lodge, as in the degree of Secret Master, is illuminated by 81 lights arranged by 9 times 9, but the hangings of the room are red. The assembly is called Grand Lodge, the Grand Master is called Patriarch, the other officers Worshipful Masters. The master and officers are attired in scarlet robes with scarfs of purple, from which is suspended the jewel, a triple triangle having in its center the compasses. Beneath it a square reversed. In the angle is a poignard. The knights wear purple collars, to which the jewel, a cross of St. Andrew, is attached. They also wear a white sash with gold fringe. The Grand Master and his 2 officers are on thrones covered with red drapery with gold fringe. Above that of the Master is a transparency of a luminous triangle, bearing within emblems of the degree. This is the first of the degrees which Ramsay proposed to substitute in place of the ancient symbolic degrees. And as a full explanation of his theory has been already given, under the degree of the Grand Scotch Knight, it is unnecessary to do more here than remark the inconsistency of this system. We have here, placed within 4 degrees of the pinnacle of his fabric, a degree intended to supersede the very first step in Freemasonry. A hierogram in this degree is thus explained. The triangle or delta is the mysterious figure of the eternal. The three letters which you see signify as follows. G at the top of the triangle refers to the grand cause of the Masons. S on the left hand, the submission to the same order, and U at the right hand to the union that ought to reign among the brethren, which altogether make but one body or equal figure in all its parts. This is the triangle called equilateral. The G in the center of the triangle signifies the great architect of the universe, who is God, and in this ineffable name is found all the divine attributes. This letter is placed in the center of the triangle that we may understand the imperative requirement for every true Mason to bear it profoundly impressed upon his heart. The hierogram, though thus explained in the ritual, means in reality God, the grand superintendent of the universe. When we compare this clumsy contrivance with the beautiful simplicity of the ancient symbolic degrees, in which the Mason is gradually advanced step by step in knowledge, being taught the whole duty of man to God, his neighbor, and himself, before he is plunged into the mysteries of triangles and other geometrical symbols, and examine the system which Ramsay proposed to set up in its place, we can but conclude that those degrees in the rite he put forward, which really possess merit, were not devised by himself but gathered from other systems. Grand Elected Knight, Kadosh, called also Knight of the Black and White Eagle, the 30th degree, is acknowledged to be very important, being found in many rites. Previously to the adoption of the ancient and accepted rite, the Kadosh degree formed, we believe, a part of the ceremonial of the Knights Templar. Regan mentions the Kadosh as having been established at Jerusalem in 1118, in which case it must, of course, have belonged to the Templars. The word from which this degree takes its name has been a considerable difficulty with all commentators. Its first appearance in the volume of the Sacred Law is where we read that God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, as mentioned in the book of Genesis chapter 2 verse 3. He separated and distinguished it from the days of the week, setting it apart for the purposes of a Sabbath, agreeably to the primary meaning of the word which is here made use of, Kodesh, signifying separated or consecrated. In the law, as delivered by Moses, we find the following precept concerning the feasts and sacred assemblages. 6 days' work shall be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest, a holy convocation. Mikra Kodesh, as mentioned in the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verse 3. Mr. Taylor says the word Kadesh, as he writes it, signifies holy or holiness and is equivalent to the Greek hieros, sacred. The name is also applied to certain places where probably there had been a divine appearance, as Meribah in Kadesh, as mentioned in the book of Numbers, chapter 27, verse 14, and Meribah Kadesh, as mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verse 51, and in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 47, verse 19, it is used in the plural Meriboth Kadesh. In its application to this degree, we must consider it to be derived from the appointments of the priestly office. In the book of Exodus, chapter 28, verses 36 through 38, and thou shalt make a plate of pure gold, and grave upon it, like the engravings of a signet, holiness to the Lord. And thou shalt put it on a blue lace, that it may be upon the mitre. Upon the forefront of the mitre it shall be, and it shall be upon Aaron's forehead, that Aaron may bear the iniquity of the holy things, which the children of Israel shall hallow in all their holy gifts. And it shall always be upon his forehead, that they may be accepted before the Lord. This plate had engraven on it, Kodesh Lihovah, which is rendered in our translation, and agreeably to the ancient versions, holiness to the Lord. The size and form are not defined by Moses, but the Jewish doctors say it was 2 fingers broad and made in a circular form, adapted to the shape of the head, and so long that it reached from ear to ear, and was fastened by a blue lace or ribbon which was tied behind the head. The mitre was a turban of fine linen, furnished in front with a plate of pure gold, bearing the inscription we have mentioned. In chapter 39, this ornament is called Nedza, from a root signifying to separate. Hence it denotes a crown as a mark of separation or distinction. It was formerly the custom in Royal Arch chapters for the third principal to wear a mitre of this description, and also a similar headplate, as well as the breastplate ordained to be worn by the high priest. These two ornaments, the headpiece and breastplate as worn by that officer in the Mount Sion chapter, the oldest in London, are now in the possession of a past principal. Their use, as well as that of some other regalia, has been discontinued. We're induced to believe that in the Kadosh was formerly comprised the degree, if it may be so called, of high priest, and that it is not unlikely to have been adopted by the military and religious orders in Palestine and conferred on the principal clerical members of those orders. We can suggest no better theory for the connection of priestly and knightly rank in the degrees of chivalry. We are told by Plush that in the East, a person preferred to honors bore a scepter, and sometimes a plate of gold on the forehead called a kadosh, to apprise the people that the bearer of these marks of distinction possessed the privilege of entering into hostile camps without fear of losing his personal liberty. We have already observed that the kadosh degree, prior to the establishment of the Supreme Council of the ancient and accepted rite in this country, was always conferred in encampments of Knights Templar. The preamble of the certificates issued up to the year 1851 runs thus: Royal and Exalted Religious and Military Order of HRDM, Grand Elected Masonic Knights Templar, KDSH of St. John of Jerusalem, Palestine, etc. By this title, the order would also appear to assume a derivation from the Hospitallers. The ritual, however, connects the degree with the Knights Templar and furnishes the history of the destruction of the Knights by the atrocious Philip of France and his minion Clement V. The Knight's costume should be black, worn as an emblem of mourning for the death of the illustrious Jacques de Molay, the martyred Grand Master. These remarks are not strictly applicable to the present practice in this country, as no reference is made to the death of Jacques de Molay. The presiding officer of this degree is styled Most Illustrious Grand Commander. There are two Lieutenant Grand Commanders, a Grand Chancellor, a Grand Marshal, a Grand Treasurer, a Grand Secretary, and Grand Master of Ceremonies. In France, there is also recognized an officer called Minister of State. The officers are grand and perfect, the rest Grand Knights. When the ritual is duly celebrated in ample form, 3 chambers are required, besides an anteroom for the reception of the candidate. According to the mode prescribed, and we believe adopted in France, the first room is hung with white drapery and displays neither dais nor altar. At the bottom of the apartment is seen a statue of wisdom dimly visible by the pale light of a spirit lamp placed over a chafing dish. In England, the chamber is hung with black. The Grand Sacrificateur here receives the candidate and his conductor. The second chamber, which is called the Areopagus, is hung with black. At the farther end of the room is a table covered with blue cloth, behind which are placed the 2 lieutenants and an officer called the Orator. These 3 form the Council of the Areopagus. The first lieutenant, seated in the center, presides, holding a golden scepter. The other lieutenant, on his right, bears the golden scales of justice, while the orator, who is on the left, displays a sword. On either side of the room are ranged the seats of the knights. 3 yellow candles light this chamber. The third hall, which is called the Senate, is hung with red. In the east is the dais, on which is placed the throne, bearing on its canopy the double-headed eagle, crowned and holding a poignard in his claws. A drapery of red and black interspersed with red crosses descends from the wings of the eagle and forms a pavilion. On each side of the throne are placed the standards of the cross. One, white, with a green cross, bears the motto, "God wills it." The other, black, with a shield charged on one side with a red cross, and on the other, a double-headed eagle, has the motto, "Conquer or die." The hall of the Senate is illuminated by 81 lights, which are dispersed in a peculiar way. Here is placed the mysterious ladder, which is symbolic of virtue and science. One of the supports is dedicated to the love of God, and the other to the love of our neighbor. The steps represent justice, candor, truth, wisdom, patience, and prudence. The platform is the ne plus ultra, The descending steps are grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. This symbol of the order appears also on the old Knight Templar certificates. The knights wear a broad black sash suspended from the left shoulder, ornamented and edged with silver fringe. On it is embroidered the Teutonic cross in crimson and crossed swords. The jewel is a naked poignard of silver with a Teutonic cross of red enamel, in the center of which are the figures 30. Some adopt the eagle of the superior degrees, the distinguishment being that the extremities are tipped with gold. We may here observe that in the practice of our French brethren, this is the last of the degrees which has its teaching engraved on the cubical stone, which is divided into 81 points, the square of 9, and the pyramid bearing the initials NPU, that is Ne plus ultra, which is variously applied to this and the 18th degree. The degree in England at the present time can only be conferred in the presence of at least 3 of the Supreme Council. It is to be observed that the description of the ceremonial is derived from a French manuscript of the middle of the last century, some portions differing in England. The degree is somewhat shorn of its dignity and importance in England, perhaps for want of proper apartments to conduct the ceremonial. It is now purely philosophical. We cannot but think the degree is of high antiquity, though not perhaps in its present form, for as now practiced, there appears a want of unity of design. Thus we find the emblematic ladder prominent in the symbolic degrees, as well as in the Rose Croix. While the admixture of the military and religious ceremonies is more conspicuous in this than in any other degree. In its present form, it bears evident traces of Teutonic origin, and most probably it was devised by the German knights. One standard used in this rite bears a green cross, which designated that nation in the Holy Land. The motto is the same as was borne by the pilgrims in the First Crusade. The red cross belonged to the Templars and was assumed by the 2 other orders on the extermination of the Templars. To this, ceremonial additions were made in the 18th century, when the ancient and accepted rite was established. Although much importance is attached to the degree, it will not bear comparison with the Rose Croix. There are several inconsistencies which strike us upon examining this degree. We may, for instance, inquire why the second chamber is named after the celebrated seat of justice at Athens. That court took cognizance of all crime and immorality, and idleness as the cause of vice. It heard causes in the darkness of night, that its members might not be prepossessed in favor of either plaintiff or defendant by their appearance. It allowed only a plain statement of facts, and hence its decisions were most just and impartial. We can see no possible connection between the degree and the Greek tribunal. Again, the third chamber bears a Roman name and one not applicable to a body which acknowledges a superior council. Other anachronisms might be noticed, but these are sufficient to illustrate the weak points of the degree. It will be seen from the preceding remarks that the philosophical part of the degree is alone retained, and all reference to Jacques de Molay discarded. But the results of research into this and the Templar degree prove that, if not identical, they were intimately connected. The allegory of the 3 days is more in harmony with the Rose Croix. Hence, some desire that the Templar degree should be brought into the ancient and accepted rite, which it appears might be accomplished if the 30 degrees were restored to its original fullness. All degrees beyond the Rose Croix are designated philosophical, as they are particularly directed to the philosophical explanation of the Masonic system, which in all the inferior degrees receives a moral signification. The Sovereign Tribunal of the 31st degree, or Grand Inquisitor Commander. It is not an historical degree, but is simply administrative in its character, the duties of the members being to examine and regulate the proceedings of the subordinate lodges and chapters. The meeting is designated a Sovereign Tribunal and is composed of 9 officers, viz. A most perfect president, a chancellor, a treasurer, and 6 inquisitors, one being elected to perform the functions of inspecting inquisitor. The decoration of the lodge is white, with 8 golden columns. On the dais above the presiding officer's throne are the letters J.E. There is also an altar covered with white drapery. In the east, on a low seat, is placed a case containing the archives of the order covered with blue drapery, having on its front a large red cross. On the right of the altar is the table of the chancellor, on the left that of the treasurer. The floor of the sovereign tribunal is covered by a painting, the center of which represents a cross, encompassing all the attributes of Masonry. As regalia, the members wear a white collar, on which is embroidered a triangle with rays, having in its center the number 31, to which is suspended a Teutonic cross. In France, the regulations direct a white apron with aurora yellow flap, embroidered with the attributes of the degree. In England, there is no badge used. Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret is the 32nd degree, and until the year 1786, when Frederick the Great instituted the 33rd, this was the summit of the Rite. The lodge is styled a grand consistory and should be held in a building of 2 stories. We first enter the chamber of the guards, and next, a room for preparing the candidates. The third, in which the lodge is held, is hung with black. On the draperies are represented skeletons, tears, and emblems of mortality, embroidered in silver. In the east is a throne, elevated on 7 steps, which is the seat of the president. The throne also is draped with black satin, bearing similar emblems to the hangings. On a table covered with black satin are the actual emblems of mortality. The covering has the letters JM in memory of Jacques de Molay. It is somewhat remarkable that, with the numerous references to the chivalric orders in this and the other degrees, the Rite ignores, as such, the Templar degree. The seats of the 2 principal officers are covered with crimson satin, bordered with black and strewn with tiers of silver. In the front are embroidered certain letters. The officers are a thrice illustrious commander, 2 illustrious lieutenants grand commanders, a minister of state, a grand chancellor, a grand treasurer, and a grand secretary. The chief wears a robe of royal purple, and he, as well as the lieutenants, wear swords. The collar of this degree is black, lined with purple, with a black cross embroidered with silver, and suspended is a silver double-headed eagle over a Teutonic cross of gold. The badge is of white satin, with a double border of black. On the flap is a trophy with the double-headed eagle. In the center of the badge is represented a camp of the Crusaders. The form of the camp is thus explained. It is composed of an enneagon, within which is inscribed a heptagon, within that a pentagon, and in the center an equilateral triangle, within which is a circle. Between the heptagon and pentagon are placed 5 standards, in the designs of which we find 5 letters, which form a particular word. On the first standard is emblazoned the Ark of the Covenant, with a palm tree on each side. The Ark has the motto Laus Deo. On the second is a lion of gold, holding in his mouth a golden key, with a collar of the same metal. The ground is blue, and on it is the device Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam. The third standard displays a heart in flames with 2 wings. It is surmounted by a crown of laurels. The field is silver. The next bears a double-headed eagle crowned, holding a sword in his right claw and a bleeding heart in his left. The field is a water green. The last bears a black ox on a field of gold. On the sides of the enneagon are 9 tents. The colors are distinguished by numbers. On the tents are certain letters which form the secret word. The tents are designed to represent the different degrees of Masonry as follows. 1. Esdras typifies the 3 first degrees with blue streamer. 2. Joshua Perfect Master green flag 3. Aholiab represents the 6th and 8th degrees, has a red and green flag. 4. Joiada the 7th degree has a red and black flag. 5. Peleg the 9th and 12th degrees has a black flag. 6. Joachim, a black and red flag, represents the 10th and 11th degrees 7. Nehemiah for the 14th degree, a red flag 8. Zerubbabel, a flag of bright green, represents the Knight of the East, the sword, or the 15th degree 9. Malachi represents the Rose Croix as well as the 16th and 17th degrees. It has a white flag with red stripes. The practice in England is to dispense with the badge, the emblems described being embroidered on the collar. The 33rd degree, or Sovereign Grand Inspector General. Its members constitute the Supreme Council, which is the chief tribunal in this rite. The degree was, as already mentioned, instituted in 1786, and not more than one Supreme Council can exist in any one nation, which must be composed of 9 members, not less than 3 of whom constitute a quorum for the transaction of business. The members of the Supreme Council of England and Wales and the offices they fill are at the present time as follow. 1. Dr. Henry Beaumont Leeson, Most Puissant Sovereign Grand Commander. 2. Charles John Wiener, Lieutenant Grand Commander. 3. Henry Atkins Bowyer, Grand Treasurer. 4. Sir John George de la Pole, Baronet, Grand Chancellor. 5. Henry Charles Vernon, Grand Secretary. 6. Robert James Shuttleworth, Captain General. There are 3 vacancies at present, honorary retired members. 1. Colonel George Augustus Vernon. 2. Dr. George Oliver. 3. Sir John Robinson, Baronet. 4. John Axtell, Deacon Cox. 5. George Beauchamp Cole, William Hyde Pullen, 32 degrees, Grand Secretary General. The lodge is hung with purple drapery, which sustains representations of emblems of mortality. In the east is the dais, having in its rear a transparency bearing the sacred name in Hebrew characters. In the center of the chamber is a square pedestal covered with crimson supporting a Bible upon which a sword is laid across. In the north is another pedestal displaying a skeleton which holds a poignard in the right hand and the drapery of the order in the left. In the west is a throne elevated on 3 steps, before which is a triangular altar covered with crimson. Over the entrance door is inscribed in letters of gold the motto of the order, Deus Meumque Jus. The chamber is illuminated by 11 lights, 5 in the east, 2 in the south, 3 in the west, and 1 in the north. The most puissant sovereign wears a royal robe of crimson satin, and on his head is a regal crown. The badge of the degree is a white sash, 4 inches broad, edged with gold fringe, and suspended from the right shoulder to the left hip. At the bottom is a red and white rosette, and on the part that covers the breast is a triangle of gold surrounded by rays, within which are the figures 33. On each side of this emblem is a drawn dagger. The jewel is the double-headed eagle of silver with a golden beak, and crowned with an imperial crown in gold, holding in his claws a naked sword. We have already noticed the ingenious proceedings of the Chevalier Ramsay and the theory which he set up respecting the rite of which we are treating. But it appears that as early as 1716, on raising the standard of revolt in Scotland, the adherents of the House of Stuart made many efforts to enlist Freemasonry as an auxiliary to their cause. The better to carry out this purpose, it was affirmed that the great legend of the order alluded to the violent death of Charles I, and that Cromwell, Bradshaw, and Ireton were alluded to as the traitors the Masons were to condemn. New degrees were invented in furtherance of the project, named Irish Master, Perfect Irish Master, etc., and all had a political bias. They doubtless were favorably received by those of the fraternity who were attached to the Jacobite cause, and if they did not give Ramsay the idea, must have furnished him with materials and encouragement to set his great scheme on foot. These Irish degrees, like all worthless and spurious imitations of Masonry, soon died out. But the ancient rite, which we are now considering, although its value is deteriorated, as we have shown by some objectionable points, yet with the exceptions we have alluded to, these degrees are not to be considered innovations on pure symbolic Masonry, but rather as illustrations of it. Connected with them are many interesting traditions and instructive speculations which could hardly fail to be useful in shedding light upon the character and objects of the institution. We have said that the greater part of these degrees are not practiced, and we do not consider it advisable that they should all be brought into use, for the most retentive memory is sufficiently taxed to accomplish all the present working. Indeed, of any brother who is perfect in these degrees, it may well be said that the wonder grew that one small head should carry all he knew. Still, something might be made of this mass of historic lore. The traditions and mysteries of this rite would furnish admirable subjects for lectures when a lodge has no work before it, of course omitting all reference to doctrinal points which might offend the peculiar religious views of any brother present. Our French brethren saw the uselessness of retaining a number of degrees in name when not more than a quarter of them could be practiced, and wisely reduced the rite into a reasonable compass. In the construction of the ancient and accepted rite, there are some omissions which we cannot find explained. why, for example, the Templar degree was not distinctly by name incorporated as a part of it. That order was certainly in existence and practiced, and it was attached to ancient Freemasonry. Again, the marked degree, as well as the Holy Royal Arch, as they were practiced at that time, contained matter far more instructive than some retained in the Rite, besides which they had and still have the merit of consistency. The mark, indeed, ought never to have been separated from the second degree, and it must eventually be restored to its proper place. The Templar degree might well be attached in this rite to the Knight Kadosh, or commander of the temple, and thus considerable progress would be made towards consolidating the various ceremonies of Freemasonry as one English rite. It has been urged as an objection to the ancient and accepted rite, and not without some show of reason, that the Supreme Council is a self-elected tribunal which is contrary to the spirit of the Masonic institution. We should, however, remember that we are directed to judge of the tree by its fruits. And when we consider the actual working of the system of government adopted in this rite, we are constrained to admit that the objections are founded rather on a theoretical basis than on its practical results. Non-attending members, as well as violators of its constitution, have been removed from time to time, and their places filled by more worthy and diligent brethren. While, with regard to the present council, we are convinced that it would hardly be possible to find throughout the world of Masonry more energetic and practical brethren than are their associated. The position they hold in social life individually, as well as their courtesy of demeanor, are not unimportant. Two of them are Grand Masters of well-ordered provinces under the Grand Lodge of England, which fact may be considered as giving a Masonic sanction to the rite. And as each and all have ever been among the workers in the several degrees from the entered apprentice upwards, they are entitled to the high esteem and respect they receive individually and as a body from the craft. The fact of the degrees embodied in the ancient and accepted rite being at the present time ignored by the Grand Lodge of England induces the idea in the minds of the great majority of the craft that they are novelties or introductions of recent date. To prove the error of this notion, we quote from the archives of the Grand Lodge of London among the constitutions and laws approved on St. John's Day 1721 by the Duke of Montagu, Grand Master, and the Grand Lodge, printed at Brussels in 1722, the 37th clause, which enacts: all the masters of lodges, knights elected Kadosh, superintendents, knights of Palestine, princes of Jerusalem, masons of the secret, Élus Écossais, knights of St. Andrew, ancient masters of the Royal Arch, officers of the Grand Lodge, masters, companions and apprentices, and all Masons in general are expressly commanded to acknowledge and recognize these present statutes, regulating all the privileges of the Grand Elected Knights, Knight Kadosh, to act in perfect conformity therewith, under penalty of nullification of their proceedings, of suspension and having their meetings interdicted, either temporarily or in perpetuity, of the lodges which act in opposition to, or which knowingly act contrary thereto, the Grand Lodge having the sole power to diminish the aforesaid proceedings. The constant accessions that are made to the ancient and accepted rite in the persons of highly educated Masons in our own land is the best proof that can be afforded of the worth of the degrees embodied in the rite. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.